And we're live on Lorebeards and Roleplaying.
Hello, hello.
Hi, everybody. And we're going to be talking about a oldie but a goodie. We're going to be talking about Runequest today. Now, Runequest has been around for a long time. It's been around since 1978. That's a long time. That's almost as old as I am, frankly. So, hey, this is pretty cool. We have a special guest today. We have, and I should clarify, also good friend of mine, not just a guest, but a personal friend, Jared Twing. Would you do me a favor, Jared, and introduce yourself and just kind of let people know, like, where they would know you from?
Sure. So, I have been contract writing for people like Ross for about 8 years now in the TTRPG space. During my day job, I am a video game programmer, but my passion and obsession is tabletop role-playing games. And about 8 years ago, I got my start working for Jason Dural on Runequest, and it was, a whirlwind journey since then for the last 8 years, as I've bounced back and forth to various places, people who need contract work, but mostly sticking around like the D100 style systems. Worked a little bit with you on some Wrath and Glory stuff, and then worked on some Call of Cthulhu, a lot of RuneQuest, Lords of the Middle Sea, which is not yet out, but coming at some point, from Chaosium, BRP stuff. And then about a year ago, I decided to branch out on my own, and that's what formed In Character Games. But we can talk about the details of some of these other books later in the show if you want. But yeah, that's the short version.
Yeah, I think it's amazing just how much overlap there is between video games and tabletop games. Almost the entire staff over at what's it called? ZeniMax, the guys who do Elder Scrolls Online. Like, those are all old school tabletop developers. And for a while, you were a lead game designer at Zynga. So it's up there. Like, people in the upper echelons are not only gamers, they're tabletop gamers, which I think is great.
Yeah, and the amount of people I talk to in the video game space that are still running campaigns. My current coworkers, I have several who are actively running tabletop games and working on their own homebrew worlds or systems and so forth. So there's definitely a huge amount of overlap.
Some of you out there are probably wondering where Vera is, our normal co-host, Vera Samila. She is not feeling well today, so unfortunately she is taking the day to rest, and so I'll be kind of filling in for her as well. And for people who don't know who I am, my name's Ross Watson. I am a game designer and author. And I've written a whole bunch of some video games, but also a whole bunch of tabletop games, including Star Wars Edge of the Empire, most of the Warhammer 40k roleplay lines, Savage Worlds Rifts, and Torg Eternity, just to hit some of the highlights. And today we're going to be going over some information about one of the building blocks, if you will, of tabletop gaming. RuneQuest is so foundational that it actually inspired many games after it, including our very own, because Andy Law runs another part of this channel, our very own Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is based on RuneQuest, which I found that out today during my research.
Very cool.
So this game RuneQuest was born, I guess I should say, 1978 with Chaosium. And it revolves around, I think, one name rings out into the mountains when you talk about RuneQuest, and that's Greg Stafford, right?
Absolutely.
Have you ever met Greg?
Unfortunately, he passed before I got a chance to meet him. He's legend in every way you can think of. And listening to the Chaosium folks talk about Greg, I feel like I met him, but unfortunately I did not get the chance to. I think the closest I came was when I was sent mimeograph copies of sheets that he had made and written on, and then like these were scanned and photocopied, and I was asked to turn those into an adventure for RuneQuest. So I got to see his scrawling and his notes for an adventure that he had planned that he never turned into something that I got to kind of step into his footsteps and make into something.
Now, I have a biography of Greg for later in the show, but I will just say right now that when you think about the titans of the role-playing game industry, Gygax, Arneson, Elmore, Easley, there are names, and one of these titans is Greg Stafford.
Absolutely.
He came up with this setting called Glorantha, and featured this game, RuneQuest, featured a groundbreaking at the time, 1978, groundbreaking percentile-based, skill-heavy system. And this would later go on to form a system called BRP, or Basic Roleplay, and it is also the engine that runs Call of Cthulhu.
Yep.
Among many others.
Yeah. The list is actually a lot larger than people realize, because there are several games on that list that are kind of sneaky in their way that they use BRP. So Dragonbane, Pendragon, both are D20 systems. But if you look behind the scenes at the D20 systems that they use, it's just BRP, but they divided all the math by 5.
Which is not a bad way to go if you're going to roll a D20 for it, which I can certainly understand. One interesting fact is that in the late 70s, RuneQuest was the second most popular RPG after Dungeons and Dragons, which is really awesome, frankly. Like, to be second to D&D is a big deal. Like, currently that title is held by Pathfinder. Although, who knows? Maybe one of these up-and-comers, maybe Draw Steel, or maybe Tales of the Valiant, or something else. Who knows? Maybe something else will bump that off. But in the late 70s, it was RuneQuest. In fact, Chaosium got the rules out to Avalon Hill, which was a board game company and primarily known for board games. They published the third edition of RuneQuest in 1984. And this is when the system kind of got a little more generic, but Glorantha was still the flagship setting for it. And that's the early era. That's like 78 through the late 80s, essentially, for RuneQuest. And then you get into the 90s, which was a super fun time. You remember the 90s in the role-playing game industry, right? Like, we had Vampire and all the White Wolf games, and girls were in the hobby for the first time. It was pretty awesome. People were going out and playing live action role play too, which was the first time that cropped up. Anyway, so in the 90s, Avalon Hill, that was, I think, the only time they ever did RuneQuest, because then it went to Mongoose, right? Mongoose Publishing picked it up, and they made 2 versions, 2006, 2010, and these were built under the OGL. And then they built, they did another one. They did one in 2012 as well, RuneQuest 6. This one is the first RuneQuest that did not have Glorantha. Does this ring any bells to you, sir?
Yeah, I think so. That's before my time of working on RuneQuest, but I believe that's when they came up with the Mithras setting. And so a lot of the Mongoose later RuneQuest stuff kind of split into what is now the Mithras, is I believe the name of the full game, but it based on very similar rules. And obviously they went a different direction than the modern Chaosium has chosen to go with it.
Yeah, Mongoose is an interesting company, and they've done a lot of interesting things in their time. There's a history there that it would be fun to get into on this show, but tonight is not about Mongoose. It is about RuneQuest, and it is also about BRP, and it is also about basically every percentile game ever, because they all kind of come back to RuneQuest at the end of the day. Around 2015, Chaosium got RuneQuest back. They reissued the classic second edition called RuneQuest Classic on Kickstarter, And then they introduced a new edition called Runequest Roleplaying in Glorantha in 2017. Now, this is probably when you got involved.
Yeah, it was shortly after what everybody calls RQG, Runequest Roleplaying in Glorantha. Mm-hmm. The first thing I wrote was supposed to be a follow-on to the Quick Start adventure. So you could go play the Quick Start and then go play this adventure that Jason asked me to write. But that's when I got on. The only thing that had come out at that point was RQG and the Quick Start.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that there's a lot of things going on with Glorantha. It's a very interesting and well-developed system. But here's where I would like to take a brief moment to talk about Greg. Again, people who don't know who he is, so I think he's criminally underrepresented sometimes when people talk about the history of tabletop games or when they talk about big names. And this dude was a real one. He's born in 1948 in Connecticut, 1948. He created the company Chaosium. That's literally him. And he built it the year I was born, in fact, 1975. And he built it with a Glorantha-based board game called White Bear and Red Moon. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, there have always been talks of trying to bring that particular game back. Chaosium's recently been getting into doing board games, so you may have seen there's a Orient Express board game. There's a Cthulhu, I don't know what it's called specifically, board game that they did, but yeah, the original Glorantha board game was very Avalon Hill inspired, very hexes and little cardboard chits and that sort of thing, all about the wars in Dragon Pass, if I remember right.
That's how war games were back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s. And I played a lot of Avalon Hill games. I played Starfleet Battles. I played I didn't play Advanced Squad Leader, right? But I played games like that, and they were all very much like, here's a paper map, here's some chits to represent your guys, your ships, or whatever.
And it was lots of charts.
Lots and lots and lots of charts.
That's back when rules were all found by number or number. So go to section 3.2.4 to find the rules for attacking with your sword or something like that.
Oh my God. Well, last week we covered the Cursed RPGs, and one of those is called Hybrid, and its rules are written that way. Oh my God, it's horrifying. But this, I'm sure, I can guarantee that the early versions of RuneQuest were far better than Hybrid. I guaranteed. Now, here's something I found out today. Do you know where the name Chaosium came from?
I do not, but I assume it has to do with the Lunar Empire and their worship of chaos and the chaos stuff from Glorantha.
Funnily enough, it actually has to do with Oakland, California. So Greg, he lived near the Oakland Coliseum, and he thought, okay, I'm going to take the name the Coliseum and I'm going to put that in with chaos and combine the two, and that's where we get Chaosium. Is the Oakland Coliseum plus chaos. I think, is it possible? This is actually a question I need your expertise on. And we have mentioned many times over on our sister channel, Lorebeards 40K, how the writings of Michael Moorcock has inspired Warhammer 40K. Do you think it's very likely that Moorcock's writing inspired Glorantha and RuneQuest?
I mean, absolutely. Greg was a master of taking a bunch of different things that interested him. He was, I don't want to speak about, Greg and like his interests because I didn't know the man, but my impression is that he was very into otherworldliness, shamanism, and this whole idea of a Bronze Age world of mythology. Like when the thing that first tripped me up when I started writing for RuneQuest was like when you think of your typical D&D realm, right? It is some sort of Earth analog set on a different planet. And so, like, if you're flying around Toril in a Spelljammer, like, you can look down and see a planet, right? Every planet of every D&D game I'd ever played in or run or homebrew world, it was a planet set somewhere in space. Glorantha was the first one that was like, no, remember those myths about, you know, a big flat disc floating on the backs of two giant turtles, and the sun actually drops into the underworld and comes out of the moon, and like, that is the reality in Glorantha. And that, like, my, you know, daytime engineer brain trying to adjust to, wait, okay, so physics isn't real in this world, right? You know, disease is not about being dirty. It's about a disease spirit has inhabited you. You know, it's not about, you know, germs. I mean, I guess you could say germs and disease spirits are the same thing, but like, it's this completely divorce your scientific brain, and now you're trying to embody this Bronze Age mythology as a Bronze Age person would believe it happened. And that belief is what actually creates the world and makes the world work. And so it's just a very different kind of setting than every other fantasy realm that I had ever had, you know, exposure to. And it kind of melted my brain the first few times I had to, you know, align the thoughts.
Actually, for my research for today's show, I compiled a list of things that will melt your brain about Glorantha, and we will get to that. I promise you, we will get to that. Yeah, Glorantha's wild, and to everybody who knows, Jared actually was the GM who introduced me to Runequest. I've never played Runequest until Jared ran it for me, and it was my eyes were pretty big when he was explaining the world to me. I was like, oh wow. But to get back to Greg Stafford briefly, I just want to talk about, in case you think, okay, Greg just did RuneQuest. No, he did not just do RuneQuest. Greg, he co-designed or designed the following games: RuneQuest, Pendragon, which is an awesome game, Ghostbusters, again back in the early 80s, but a very good game, Prince Valiant, HeroQuest. If you've ever played HeroQuest, that's Greg Stafford. Board games, Nomad Gods, Elric. I'm pretty sure he was a Moorcock fan. King Arthur's Knights, and many others. And he was the guy who published Call of Cthulhu. Without Greg Stafford, there would not be a Call of Cthulhu, at least not the way, not as we know, which is a big deal. And then, of course, RuneQuest, he streamlined that into what became known as the basic role-playing system back in 1980. My God, that's old. I had no idea how old that was. And that's the engine, of course, for Call of Cthulhu and many, many other games. So his legacy carries on today. Now, he left Chaosium in 1998. He took the full rights with him for Glorantha and founded a company called Issaries Incorporated. And that's where he kept on doing more HeroQuest and Hero Wars stuff. And he essentially retired from the business in 2004 to move down to Mexico. And I believe that was kind of the end of his involvement in the industry directly, but his influence has carried on a lot. He's been named by Pyramid Magazine as one of the most influential persons in adventure gaming, period, which I will absolutely agree. Very, very unfortunately, he died in 2018, and I wish I had had the time to meet him. Just like Jared was saying, the dude's amazing. It would be very worthwhile just to hang out with the guy, talk to him sometime. Oh, he works on a video game too called King of Dragon Pass back in 1999. In case you're curious about that. One of my favorite books of all time is the Great Pendragon Campaign, which was first released in the 90s and later reissued. It's amazeballs. If you're a King Arthur fan or a Pendragon fan, or if you just want to see what a giant decades covering campaign could look like, check out the Great Pendragon Campaign. It is 100% worth your time. So that takes us through Greg. That takes us through like the early stuff of RuneQuest. Is there anything I've left out?
Not that I can think of. I mean, there's all sorts of other details along the journey of what made Chaosium into what it is today and what made Glorantha into what it is today. I'm sure in your notes we haven't pre-gamed this at all, so I don't know where you want to go on this conversation, but I would be remiss not talking about Jeff Richard and Jason Durrell as two of the titans in Chaosium in modern day who helped make role-playing in Glorantha what it is today.
Yeah, Jason is someone I know. I wouldn't say we're close friends or anything, but I really liked him. I really liked meeting him. I really liked speaking to him. He was he's one of those guys I think of that is one of our shining stars in the industry. Like he is not only very talented, he's not only very hardworking, he's also very trustworthy. And those things all in one place is unfortunately rare. So I'm like, yeah, Jason Durrell is one of the real ones, for sure. I wish I met the other guy because I'm positive that he's probably cut from the same cloth.
So Jeff, he's the creative force behind modern RuneQuest. He is, if Greg was the RuneQuest shaman, Jeff is the assistant shaman who's there to take his place. I mean, Jeff is an amazing, amazing person, and his knowledge about Glorantha and about RuneQuest is never ending. If you follow the game at all, like on Facebook, he will just put up 3-4 page information posts about some random Glorantha topic. Like in RuneQuest, names matter, and this is why names matter. So let's talk about names in Sartar was one he did recently. And so like Jeff is just he's one of the founders of the modern Chaosium. There were several of them that got together to kind of reacquire all the rights and bring the company back from where it was in the, I guess, mid 2010s. Don't quote me on those dates, but yeah, Jeff is just a font of RuneQuest knowledge.
Oh, it would actually be fun to just talk about Chaosium as a company at some point, because their journey has been a long one, and it has full of twists and turns. And they're now back and doing very well, which is great. But there was a period of time where they were not doing so well, and it looked like they may go away. So it's good. It's glad. I'm glad that they have recovered.
Yeah, it was 4 or 5 of them. Again, I was not involved at the time, and I don't want to misquote. So I think it was 4 or 5 of them that got together, formed a partnership. They had an existing company, Red Moon Publishing, I think it was, and then they acquired Chaosium and all the rights and everything, and they have, blown on that ember until it has risen like a phoenix. And Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, Pendragon. Recently, they stepped in to help out Seventh Sea. It's BRP. Like they're doing very well.
Yeah, I admire them. I think Chaosium. There's several game companies I could talk about where I am not especially a big fan of them, but Chaosium is one that I would unhesitatingly say, yeah, they're a great company that makes good product that treats their people well.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of RuneQuest, because there's some really interesting things. I think people who are anybody who's only ever played D&D will probably be in for some surprises here. First of all, one of my favorites is something that inspired the Elder Scrolls series, and that is that the skills improve when you use them in play, not just from leveling up.
This is a core mechanic of all BRP games. There's no levels. There are no experience points, right? You get better by using your skills. You go out and you fight a dragon, you swing your sword. If you hit with your sword, you get to put a little checkbox next to your sword skill. If you sneak past that dragon's cave's entrance, you get to put a little checkbox next to whatever the skill for sneak in that particular system is. If you use your knowledge to learn about dragons, then you can check your knowledge dragon skill if that's a thing in your setting. And that is one of the defining things about the whole BRP system is that what you use gets better and there's no levels. And that also means that you are not tied to a character class. They use a profession system to kind of guide your creation of the character. But since anything you use, you go up if you use it successfully. That means if you're started as a wizard and you pick up a sword and are successful with it enough times, you can use a sword now. Like there's no, there's prerequisites for wielding weapons and all that good stuff, but there is no class system that's going to lock you into this is how you advance your character.
Yeah, and if you are out there playing Skyrim on your Apple Watch or your smart refrigerator, because I think you can do that now. If you're out there playing Skyrim, you can thank Runequest for the way that your skills work in that game, because they're literally based on Runequest. Now we have a fun question from one of our audience here. Stefan Rowe says, "Can you give a short rundown of what Runequest is as a setting?"
Sure. So Runequest is a Bronze Age role-playing setting. It's a game of mythology. It's a game of playing in a very ancient world that has lots of history behind how it got to where it is. But it is about there's no 100% Earth analog to the Runequest setting. And the Runequest setting, Glorantha, is so large that you can find places all over the globe. Well, it's not a globe, the world of Glorantha to find versions of old Earth worlds in various places. But most of it is focused around an area called Dragon Pass, and it is. The closest I can equate to is like if you were playing in ancient Babylon or something in the Three Rivers area of the ancient world.
Sumeria and
and there's no, like, when you look at the art, you can see a little bit of Romanesque here, you can see a little bit of Sumerian here, you can there's a bunch of different Bronze Age societies that you can kind of pick out some of the pieces, but there are no, they're not supposed to be, analogies of one another. And all of the weapons are made from bronze. Iron is actually a terrible way to make weapons in Runequest. They don't do as much damage, and you want the bronze weapons and the bronze armor if you want the strongest of all of them. But it's a world where the gods exist, and their power is directly related into cults that are basically religions, and your religion, your cult that your character belongs to, helps define your character, and so it's a very fantastic world. There's dinosaurs, dragons, dragon newts, duck people, like ogres, trolls. Trolls is a playable race. The elves in Glorantha are, one of them is made from wood, and the dwarves, they're dwarves made from different kinds of stone and metal. So it's all very fantastical, and everybody can use a little bit of magic at least. So it's a high fantasy setting set in a Bronze Age society where religion and your cult is paramount to understanding your worldview.
Yeah, magic in Glorantha is not rare. It suffuses politics and warfare and daily customs. It's usually tied to specific deities and cults or magical traditions like shamanism and spirit binding. The gods are literal beings, and their worshippers gain real powers. The cults often fight over doctrine and turf and access to divine runes and spells. The name of the game is Runequest, and runes are a big thing. I remember when Jared explained to me, everyone has a rune. I was like, oh, really? Everyone? Literally everyone.
Usually more than one, yeah.
And the world itself is, as Jared pointed out, is flat. It has a dome-like sky. It was created by the goddess Glorantha, which is also the name of the world. and her elemental gods: darkness, water, fire. Sorry, darkness, water, earth, sky, and fire. So there's 5.
Which are the 5 runes.
5 runes. And the cosmos is divided into 2 realms: the mortal, time-bound world of humans, and the intemporal realm of the gods. And what intemporal means, it's a place where time flows differently or doesn't seem to flow at all. I'm a little confused on that.
Join the club.
You can't shed any light on that.
No, not on that one. Yeah.
All right.
My focus has been on Glorantha in the quote modern day, right? Glorantha as an adventurer. What is it like to be an adventurer in Dragon Pass, an adventurer in Sartar, the main setting for role-playing in Glorantha. There is a side setting that they're working on with a new version of the rules that is going to be all about a place called the Big Rubble. There's an old campaign back from the 70s and 80s about this place called the Big Rubble, so they're going to set some stuff there as well. But most of the RQG stuff is set in Dragon Pass and most of it in Sartar.
Right. So the 2 realms do still interact. There's, as in the realm of the gods and in the realm of the mortal world, magic, visions, and heroic journeys where they do something called god walking.
Hero quests.
Hero quests, yes, the hero quest. Could you define that for us?
Well, so this is another one of those, like, Jeff could talk for days on the idea of a hero quest. It is something that, imagine there is this myth of a god that does a thing, and you and your cult get together on a high holy worship day, and you go into a state of worship to the point where you go on this hero quest, and different people in the worship ceremony take on different roles of the mythology, and they perform this heroic journey almost as if traveling to a spirit plane to do it. And they actually go and do this quest in this spiritual, like, heroic journey of a hero quest. And this is ways that people can learn things from their god, ways that they can gain boons and that sort of thing. It's been one of the pieces that's been hardest for me to define and wrap my head around for RQG. But it's not something that everybody has to include in their game either, right? It's very next level highbrow, if you will.
No, it's deep. For anybody who doesn't know, there's this thing called the monomyth, which is also called the hero's journey. Very famously, a guy called Joseph Campbell wrote about it. It influenced everything from Jung's psychology to almost all narratives everywhere.
Star Wars.
Star Wars is a very strong archetype of the hero's journey.
Specifically a New Hope. Yeah.
Thank you. So if you're curious about the monomyth of the hero's journey and how this is all like deep lore for everything, and how it fits into the mythology, the mythic nature of Glorantha. This is one of the things that's really cool about Glorantha, frankly. It's built on some very ancient bones, So I dig it greatly. Let's see here. So Runequest, Glorantha, I should say, is centered on 2 main continents. There's Genertala. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
I don't think so, but I couldn't correct you. So,
which is kind of roughly like Eurasia, and Pameltala. So Genertala and Pameltala. Pameltala is a little more like Africa, and there's a very wide array of very non-Western, non-Tolkien-esque, for lack of a better word, cultures, and these are complex empires to hill tribes, right? Like it runs the gamut. Correct?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't know that was a question. Yeah, I mean, even within Dragon Pass, you have multiple different cultures. The focus of RQG has been this one region. So I never did a bunch of research to all of the rest of the either the northern continent or the southern continent. But even within Dragon Pass, you have Azrolia, which is a very cosmopolitan, almost like Cairo at its height, very, civilized society, to horse people that are all tribes, all living on nomadic, on horseback, riding around, like to Sartar, which is the main focus, which is a country that has been taken over many times, and is at war actively with the Lunar Empire, which is, if you squint, you might be able to recognize some other historical empires. Like, there's got a little bit of Roman Empire to it, and many other different facets and things it's based on. But there's so much to Glorantha's, not just its mythology, but its geography. It's huge. And like the northern continent is massive. The part that I've talked about is like 15% of the northern continent. It's this tiny little sliver, but it's the one that has had the most written about it and the most focus of all the games for the last 50 years.
This is why I really admire Stafford's vision for his world, because he built it on some very scholarly roots. Now, this was common in the late 70s, early 80s. There were a lot of games that came out in that period that had a very scholarly approach to world building. It's what I like to call the Tolkien-esque approach, but very many people tried it and not so many people did it very well. Some examples of other games that tried it were like Sky Realms of Jarun or Empire of the Petal Throne, which we will probably talk about at some point. Empire of the Petal Throne. Less said about that, the better for now. It's a big old can of worms and it's connected to a certain German political party from the 1930s. That let's just not worry about it. But anyway, so Glorantha is part of a movement, is what I'm trying to say, of late 70s to early 80s, very scholarly based world building. And Glorantha, I think, is the one that achieved it probably more than anything else except maybe Lord of the Rings. I mean, it achieved it. It achieved itself in a very interesting spot. And I think there's several comments here that I should bring up. Like this one from Godzilla Rex. Love non-generic fantasy. Well, go check out some Runequest, my friend.
Runequest is the only game I've ever bought a book for and realized that the book I had purchased was a collection of scholarly essays about things about this world. Like there's an entire book that has 0 rules in it whatsoever, and it's just various different topics from various places across Glorantha. A lot of it's about mythology, a lot of it's about the cults and that sort of thing. But it was an entire book that every part of the book was, I literally was looking for, the footnotes that you would expect to see in a scholarly, work. And it's that level of like, people take this, I don't want to say seriously, because it's a game. We all love to play our games, right? But it engenders a different level of interest from some of the community that have really poured their heart and souls into it for 50 years.
Yeah, I'd say if you're a history nerd, you're going to probably get more out of Glorantha than maybe most. So there's that. We have a fun little super chat over here. Thank you so much, Ricky Chapman, for the super chat. He says, by the way, Ricky Chapman is our local gamer who talks to us all the time about his campaigns, and they sound amazing. Ricky Chapman says, I'm making our own tabletop roleplay game inspired by RuneScape, the show Primal, and the web show Dinosauria. Technology level is transitioning to the Bronze Age. So from the Stone Age, I'm guessing, to the Bronze Age for most. That's really interesting. And I should also point out that super chats are the absolute best way to support the channel and help us produce more content for you guys. So we're very grateful for all of them. Do appreciate Ricky Chapman for jumping on that grenade for us right off the bat.
Yeah, I did mention that there's dinosaurs in the RuneQuest setting, and they are not necessarily as unintelligent as you might think dinosaurs are.
Me, Grimlock, leader now. One other little bit of fun about Glorantha's, Runequest's system is that almost everyone can cast a little bit of magic. Unlike D&D, where magic is kind of rare, depending on the setting, obviously. Forgotten Realms, much less rare. RuneQuest, if you're in RuneQuest, even a low status character, like a beginning character, can learn a few basic spells, and it makes the world feel very saturated by magic, but also more mythic, right? Because it's not it's not like you're casually using magic, but it's in the layers of myth and the hero's journey and things like that are part of the setting.
Yeah, so you have in RQG, you have 4 kinds of magic, right? Most characters know 2, and then there are 2 more that come into play for certain styles of characters. Almost every character knows spirit magic and rune magic. And spirit magic is you have a pool of daily magic points that you can use to power spirit magic spells. And they do things like make your weapon sharper or give you a little bit of armor and, to various like utility things. And then you have rune magic, which is super powerful. Like if you want to make a chart that is an equation, it's at least 4 times as powerful as spirit magic. And you only get a certain number of rune points. And when you use those up, I think starting characters start with 2 or 3. If you use those up, they are gone until you have time to go worship at your cult's temple to worship your cult's god and get bestowed upon you your rune magic once again. And so this gives you this interesting game paradigm where you've got a lot of spells thrown and a lot of them are just spirit magic, but every once in a while you pull out one of the rune magic spells, and that's when stuff's getting really serious. Like if you're using rune points, that means that the chips are down and you're really wanting to go all in.
Yeah, I would say spirit magic is kind of your utility. I mean, you can correct me, please, because I'm not the expert. But my understanding is that spirit magic is kind of like your utility magic, whereas rune magic is let me shape reality a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, there is some spirit magic that is less utility and like offensive, like you can, cast little attack spells and that sort of thing, but they just aren't as powerful as rune magic. Whereas rune magic is, no, this is not me. And like to get metaphysical, right? Spirit magic is, working with the spirits, using your energy and using the spirits around you to shape and using things that spirits have taught you to shape reality around you. Whereas using rune magic is calling upon the gods to change reality, right? So one is it's magic, it's local, it's using spirits and it's using spirit magic, and one is calling down godly power.
Yeah, which is on a whole different level. Funny note, one of the things you could do in RuneQuest is there's a puzzle, almost like a puzzle type mechanic for enchanting magic items, because it's like you're programming it with conditions and rune point costs, and it makes it's not just like a recipe and boom, out comes your magic sword. You're like, no, I am literally setting up this if then kind of situation.
Yeah, the enchantment stuff that was in RQG was a little simpler than that. I'm sure that they have expanded on it, and earlier editions may have had far more put into it. The interesting thing from my point of view is almost all enchantments literally cost you stat points to generate, right? Thankfully, it's the one characteristic that you can increase just by using it. So characteristics in RuneQuest look a lot like D&D characteristics. There's some definite differences, and one of them is called POW, or power. And your POW fluctuates. You can sacrifice it to do big things in magic, like enchantments, but also as you use magic and overcome somebody else's POW, your POW can get a little checkbox just like your skills, and you can raise it during your advancement times. So yeah.
I read something interesting about how detect magic works. in Runequest, and that is that it actually causes things to glow.
Mm-hmm.
And my research says that there are locations in Glorantha where they, like big marketplaces, where they just flat out ban the use of detect magic because everything would light up. Literally everything would just be like.
Well, I imagine you're living in a society where, you know, you can on yourself on a whim, you can like, I need some more armor. I don't feel safe. And so you cast a spirit magic protection spell on yourself, right? Or there are all sorts of spells that allow you to modify your characteristics. If I'm a Isseries merchant who is going to spend the day trying to haggle my wares, the last thing I want is somebody detecting magic and knowing that I cast a improve charisma spell on myself to you know, better haggle against them. You know, it would not be it would be frowned upon if somebody knew that you were using magic to get a better deal out of them. But this is typical in a world where everybody can use magic so much.
Glorantha also famously does not have orcs. It has, as you pointed out, the elves are kind of like plants a little bit. And
green elves, brown elves.
The dwarves are very rare, secretive, and physically unsettling.
Yeah, some of them are made of stone, some of them are made of metal, and
almost like golems.
Yeah, they want to do their dwarven things and be left alone.
So dwarves are like little golems, and elves are like little trees, which is kind of wild. I love that.
Like little mini ents, if you will. Yeah, the closest thing that I would say that you would get to orcs, and it depends on your reading of orcs, right? In many modern settings, orcs are, you know, different than in some older settings, but the troll and the trollkin are the closest thing that Glorantha, in my mind, has to like an orc-like race. They worship deities of darkness, and they are not evil, right? They just have a very different worldview than most people, and yeah, some of that might include eating people. But you know, that's their diet. Not that they're malicious about it. And they come in various sizes, from big giant trolls to, you know, human-ish sized trolls to little trollkins that you know, might be what you would, if you squint, you might say, oh, that's a goblin versus an orc versus a bugbear or something like that. But they're all various species of trolls that live in the dark and, you know, have their own whole society and their own cults and magic.
Well, if we're talking about Glorantha species, there's one we cannot leave out, and that is the Derules.
Yes, the duck people. Yeah, they are
the mighty ducks of Glorantha.
And what's hilarious is a lot of them worship a cult, the cult Humacht, which is a vast warrior cult that, like, their spells that they get are, you know, if you want to be the best swordsman there can be, you're a Humacht. And the fact that the Derules, a lot of them worship Humacht, is just hilarious to me.
There's a lot of, I would say, slightly tongue-in-cheek information about the Derules. They are wrapped up in, I would say, equally silly and dark lore in the world, which is pretty fascinating.
In the middle of Dragon Pass, there's a swamp that is just infested with undead, and it's led by a lich-like being with his vampire followers and that sort of thing. And just to the south of that is where the Derules, like, hometown is. And so these ducks hate the undead with a passion. And so this idea of this town of ducks that is pushing back against a necromantic lich and his vampire minions and undead hordes, and have been for a very long time, just it's amazing.
So is Duckula a playable thing?
I'm sure you could make it.
The Derules, they are a cursed race of anthropomorphic duck people. There appears, according to my research, there appears to be no agreement on whether they were originally humans turned into ducks, or ducks who were turned into people. Right? We don't know.
Well, and that assumes that they just weren't duck people from the beginning.
Right?
This is a world of mythology, right? It could have been neither of the above.
And the necromancer is Delecti, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they are that means that the rules typically in the setting are cynical, hard-bitten, and tough-minded. They're like Logan or Clint Eastwood as a duck, basically.
Yeah, you can imagine one with a cigar hanging out of its mouth, all film noir style.
They are fully playable player character races in Glorantha. They have proper stats, skills, cultural write-ups. They have duck-run villages like Duck Point.
Yeah, that's the one I was mentioning.
And they went through a very tragic arc in the lore of Glorantha. Can you name that arc, please?
I don't know it. You're going to have to, since you've got the research there.
My research indicates that this arc was called the Duck Hunt.
Yes, I recall this.
And this was after some major rebellion. The Derules, the duck people, they were scapegoated, persecuted, driven out of their homes, which is a very dark chapter in Gloranthan history. It's kind of like it's analogous to many other ethnic cleansings in the real world.
Yeah,
which is why it's dark. They're also very weirdly deep in the lore.
Oh yeah, they've been around from the beginning. Like it was, I don't know what sort of where Greg came up with his idea or why, but they have been around since as long as RuneQuest has been a thing, I believe.
And there's actually there's some laws in Glorantha that apply to them differently, because it seems like the world is kind of hostile to ducks in some way, which is kind of wild. So typically longtime fans of Glorantha, they either love the ducks or they hate them. There's no middle ground.
Well, and Greg was very clear for like his whole career. He had this saying of "Your Glorantha may vary," right? And it's an acronym that RuneQuest lovers throw around all the time. YGMV or something like that, right? Your Glorantha may vary. And you don't like ducks, just take them out. You don't like the trolls being eating people, take it out. Whatever you want to do, it's your game, right? And it's you will see that over and over again in RuneQuest communities. Your Glorantha may vary.
Now I was unable to find a direct link, but it does seem there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that the games, the Japanese games called Suikoden, are very strongly influenced by Glorantha, because the Suikoden games also include playable ducks.
So does Dragonbane.
Well, Dragonbane, though, that's actually from Chaosium, which is so.
Well, it was Dragonbane came from we can get into that a little bit. I don't know the whole history, but it's a completely separate company. It's completely separate publishing. It was, but like now the rules are a very different rule set. It's still BRP, but there's the ducks in the middle of the rules.
So I don't want to dwell too long on the ducks. They are just a really fun and interesting facet of the game system, the game setting. I did run across a couple of other names that I wanted to throw your way in case you know more, because I feel like you might know more, but if you don't, it's perfectly fine. One of the names I came across was something called the Jack of Bears, or Jacko Bears, and it says he's got a pumpkin head.
Yeah, it's a monster that's in the Gloranthan Bestiary. It is so. If Trollkin I said troll and Trollkin, they're not bad. They're just dark. They just worship the dark gods, right? They're not evil. They're just misunderstood, right? The flip side of that is chaos. And, for many people, like you can harken back to all the Warhammer stuff, chaos bad, right? And so things like the Jack of Bears, there are a whole set of monsters that the name suddenly escapes me, that they're the kind of like chaos foot soldiers. And they're mutant, very Warhammer Fantasy feeling. Not that Warhammer didn't come many years after Runequest, but like chaos and its entities are, considered by many to be the real bad guys, right? The real evil. But then you look and there's a whole empire who have decided that chaos isn't as bad as all that. And they use chaos because they're like, well, if we have this nuclear weapon, we're going to be able to use the nuclear weapon for our side instead of letting somebody else use it. So the Lunar Empire, has chaos as part of their culture. And they even have, during the wars where the Lunar Empire is pushing into Sartar, they summon this giant bat, this giant chaos monster.
The Crimson Bat.
The Crimson Bat that, comes and like can devour whole units. I'm sure it, was in the old board game, like as a single token that like, oh, the Crimson Bat's going to come and eat all of your units, right? So it's this giant bat that is the size of most games would say the size of a dragon. Dragons in Glorantha are much bigger.
So would you say that the presence of a Crimson Bat in the sky is a signal, shall we say, of Chaos's presence?
Oh, yeah.
A Crimson Bat signal, so to speak?
Yeah. If you go into the Lunar Empire, the moon actually turns red. And so like they worship the red moon goddess. Within they actually have a giant spell that has been cast for a very long time that has a line that within that line you're in the Empire's purview, and the moon is crimson, and things are far more chaotic.
That is absolutely wild, and I love it. Glorantha is wonderfully weird, and I really dig that. A little while earlier, you mentioned a thing called the Big Rubble, and I wanted to go over that a little bit because my reading indicates that is kind of like an outdoor dungeon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's like a giant shattered ruin that functions like an enormous open air dungeon full of treasure and cults and horrors. And the city of Pavis is nearby.
Yep.
And the rulers of the city of Pavis, they regulate who gets to go into the Big Rubble and adventure. So it's like...
Yeah, it's a whole campaign setting on its own. There was, I don't know for which edition, there was I think there was a box set about the Big Rubble. And, longtime Gloranthan fans will point to Pavis and the Big Rubble as, like people talks about Masks of Nyarlathotep and Call of Cthulhu. It's this classic campaign for RuneQuest.
Speaking of campaigns in RuneQuest, my research showed me that, at least maybe in some of the earlier editions, there was an awful lot of farming and cattle raiding in the Dragon Pass area. Especially, there's a big chunk of play about herding and raiding cattle.
Yeah, so the quick start adventure that you can still download from Chaosium is about a cattle raid that you're in Sartar and your heroes are called upon to, get involved in this tribal, conflict that started with a cattle raid. And absolutely that takes a big part of the play. Now, in modern RuneQuest, if your character is a noble or a priest, you are granted lands by your clan, and there's a whole system of like, how big is that land? How much money do you get per season for that land? Yes, you could be a cattle rustling duck.
Wesley's he's Dutch, so he often was like, wait, what? And he wants to know if he could be a cattle wrestling duck. Apparently he can.
You absolutely can be. And so like if you play one of these kinds of characters, there's this kind of separate sub game about season by season what is happening to your land, and how much money your lands are generating, and that sort of thing. And that was actually one of the things that I wrote for the equipment guide, which is blown out, but it's up here. The RuneQuest equipment guide has a whole chapter on improving your lands and the kind of little extra things you can do with your lands. And that was the impetus of the game that I created that we'll talk about later.
And just to go back very briefly to the Crimson Bat, I read that this thing was so absurd that it would basically solo entire regions in Glorantha.
Yeah, I mean it's like all of the BRP games have those enemies that are not meant to be fought, right? Like you don't fight Cthulhu, right? You try to prevent him from being summoned,
right?
And that is your fight. And if you fail in that, you die, right? If you're still around when he shows up, it's game over. The Crimson Bat is the Gloranthan version of that sort of thing. Like, could you survive? Maybe if you have enough rune magic stacked up and are really lucky and the dice go your way and you've prepared, maybe, but that's not the fight you normally expect to win.
So you could say he is the knight. He is vengeance. He is the Crimson Bat.
He is the Crimson Bat.
Yeah, they had to nerf this in later editions because it was so strong. Like it was.
Oh, it's still insanely strong. Like,
now, to go back briefly to the cows and the cattle wrestling and all that, there's a reference I found to a rumor in Glorantha that an entire range of hills is actually a giant sleeping cow that transformed into it, like a landmass-sized bovine, just laid down, fell asleep, and became a range of hills.
This sort of thing all over Glorantha. Dragon Pass is so named because the hills are supposed to be the body of a sleeping dragon. So it would not shock me that there is a hill region named for a sleeping cow, giant sleeping cow.
Speaking of dragons, that's where the dinosaurs come from, right?
Yeah, they're related. It might be the other way around. I'm not remembering right now if it was dinosaurs came from dragons or dragons came from dinosaurs. I believe it was dinosaurs are descended from the dragons, but there are also a race of humanoid-sized dragons that they're not intended to be a player character race like Dragonborn in D&D, and like these people they're called dragon roads, where there are rune stones that connect various places, and the dragons can go to one of these rune stones and they can not teleport, but basically become invisible and travel at insane speeds along this straight line, straight through terrain and everything else, and get to one of these other. So there's these really fantastic otherworldly race of dragon people that have a whole ecology of different forms they take as they get older and so forth. But fascinating lore going more into all of the various different races.
Speaking of fascinating lore, I got to share this one bit that I found, and I want to know more about it. So there's things called dream dragons, and these are, according to my research, these are literal nightmares and suppressed desires of sleeping dragons that take on their own form.
Yeah. The dragons are so big, right? That like when Dragon Pass is supposed to be under or over the body of one of them. And so their intelligence is so vast and so ancient that they, affect the land of myth around them. There's I don't remember which adventure scenario book it's in, but there's a whole adventure around one of these dream dragons where you get to interact with it and so forth.
That is fascinating to me. I love the idea of something like Smaug's greed taking on a semi-physical form in the manner of his dreams, that it then prowls around Misty Mountain. Like, that's what I'm imagining in my head.
Yeah, well, imagine if Smaug was so big that Misty Mountain was Smaug, just built on top of him, and then the thing that the dwarves and Bilbo interacted with was actually just the dream dragon. He's still asleep under the mountain. You've not been talking to the actual dragon. You've just been talking to, a figment of his imagination made real.
I love that. It blows my mind. That is actually really, really cool. Let's see. I think one of the other really bizarre bits, and this is, we'll shift over to something else, but I wanted to mention this one just because it's so wild. Apparently, the goddess named Kylorella fell in love with Galad, which was the ugliest fish god known to man. And Kylorella was the goddess of a floating island. And apparently this love that she had with the ugly fish god created a curse so that now her island drifts across the sea surrounded by fish swarms, which is making it sort of a weird Romeo and Juliet tragedy of romance that's in the shape of a landmass. Does that ring any bells to you?
It doesn't, but it does not shock me. I mean, Glorantha is so full of these over-the-top myths that are reality in this realm. It's like one of I don't know, is Steph Van Roe had posted earlier, what's your favorite culture or of Glorantha? And there is a tribe that is not a part of the main tribes of Sartar, but separate tribe, and they are all wolf people that are able to transform. They're not lycanthropes, but they're able to transform between wolf and human form, and they have ingrained themselves into the ruling class of Sartar, such that one of the former princes used them as bodyguards. And so even though they are of chaos and everybody thinks chaos is bad and these people are fully cursed, they are allowed to exist within Gloranthan society as this lycanthropic tribe that lives in a certain area, and that area wasn't always theirs. They were given that area by the rulers of Sartar, suppressing and pushing out other tribes that already lived there. So these other tribes around them hate them, and they have to live in this spot because it's the only land they have anymore. So you get this kind of fighting of societies, fighting of tribes, but also racial tensions. And yet at the same time, they are of chaos, but have been granted this land by the king of Sartar in the past. And so they have royal decree that says they're allowed to be there. But then you have all this enmity of these tribes that were pushed out of their ancestral homes to make room for these people. Like, there are so many parallels that I won't draw for you, but like, it is a fascinating setting, just Dragon Pass in and of itself. One of the things that I would be remiss if we moved on from Glorantha without talking about is, if you buy the main source book and then go buy the Game Master pack and then start picking up like the little adventure booklets and then start looking at things like Johnstown Compendium, which is the community made adventures for RQG through drive-through. You can start, there's even a map that somebody made of Sartar and Dragon Pass where they have plotted out where all these different adventures happen. And the way I run Runequest when I run it is actually as a sandbox with all of these different things that are happening around based on all of these different pieces of adventures that have been set up. And so you can find a place to put your PCs, and if they're nobles and priests, then they'll have land. They start building up their, home and their homestead, and then they're going to go and find all of these different adventures around them. And you can just create this whole sandbox of adventure in that Dragon Pass Sartar area where you can just, there's so many things and so many books that you can pull from. And it's not just, place this random adventure here or wherever you want to. It is like, this is how this adventure ties into this specific place. There's the battle for Apple Lane is an old school scenario that they redid, and I believe it's in the Game Master's Guide. But it's this very specific, just tiny little like thorp that is it means nothing, but it's along a major road, and there was an adventure place there, many years ago, and now they've updated it to the newest one. And so like you've got all of these great little adventures, or some of them bigger adventures, that are sprinkled throughout the land, and you can just run this like full sandbox, and just it just I love that sort of campaign style, and like the fact that you can do that by just collecting a few books in the Game Master's Guide. More recently, they put out a Dragon Pass source book. They've been working through all of the different cults. So I want to say there's 4 or 5 out of 7 individual hardback tomes about the different kinds of cults and all of the religion, and because cults make up such an intricate part of your character. Like the setting is so detailed, it will blow your mind.
I mean, Jared, you are a born storyteller, and I could just you describing it like that, it's like, oh man, my imagination's just going crazy. I think you hit on something really important though, is that Glorantha and RuneQuest in general, it rests upon a massive groundswell of community support. And I can think of no better way to explain this to people than by the idea of the magazines and fanzines, also called APA zines, that have been published since 1976, supporting this game. It is, if you want to talk about like a community of gamers that all get together and want to be super creative about a thing, the Glorantha community is that. It is chock full of very, very passionate people. Back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have Substack. We had fanzines and the Substacks of their day. So just to name a few, there was the Worms Footnotes, which lasted from 76 to 82. This was a official Chaosium magazine that supported White Bear and Red Moon, and then later Runequest, and then fully into Glorantha later on. Then there was Hearts in Glorantha, which was also licensed, and this one covered the second and third ages, and it appears to be explicitly endorsed by the license holders of Glorantha. So it's a very well-known one. There's one called Different Worlds. There's one called Havoc Tales, Tales of the Reaching Moon, Trade Talk, The Book of Drastic Resolutions. I mean, that's a lot of fanzines. That's like a Star Trek level of fanzines.
Yeah, I mean, they are the Gloranthan RuneQuest fans they've been around for 50 years, right? And they've had a lot of time to build a lot of fan material. And in the modern era, you see that in Johnstown Compendium, where Chaosium has said, hey, we recognize that you people exist, and we really want to support you supporting Glorantha and working for it. And since we can't hire you all to be contract writers, and we can't publish all the things that you have to say, here's this space where you can put things out, make some money off of it, and join everybody else in making Glorantha your own.
I believe Hearts in Glorantha is still published today, actually.
Oh, nice.
I think. I don't know for sure. It's something that just came up. And, we should definitely mention all of the games that are based on or influenced by RuneQuest. Now, we've mentioned a few. We talked about Call of Cthulhu. We talked about Suikoden. But there's so many that I made a list. Obviously, Call of Cthulhu. We talked about that one. The rule set, 100%. Mm-hmm. It comes from RuneQuest. And, of course, Greg was the first publisher. And remember when I asked you about Michael Moorcock? The Stormbringer role-playing game, the Elric role-playing game, was also published by Chaosium, also based on RuneQuest.
I played a weekend before last at Chaosium Con US. I played a Pendragon hack in the Stormbringer world. So somebody ran a Stormbringer game, but rather than use the old 80s Stormbringer cardboard box, they updated the rules to use the modern Pendragon rules. It was a lot of fun.
And then there's Pendragon, also called Mithras, or is that the other? No, that's the
Mithras is the other.
Right.
Mongoose. I believe it was Mongoose based Runequest setting.
Right. Hero Quest, Hero Wars, King of Dragon Pass. There's one called Aquilar, which is a Spanish language RPG that's based on Runequest. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, heavily influenced by Runequest's percentile core, detailed combat, and gritty and deadly feel.
And once you include that one, then like the number of games that spring off of that, I don't know if your list includes all of those, but.
Well, I just the direct ones, and then you're right, but it is a launching point. But the early designers of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay do explicitly, openly credit RuneQuest. So just that's a
very cool. Good
point there. Any D100 game, Shadow of the Demon Lord, Lords of Gorka, Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader, Deathwatch, they all trace some of their DNA back to RuneQuest's game stuff. We talked about Suikoden from Konami, which, by the way, has a set of magic in it called True Runes. Like I said, I couldn't find a direct connection, but I was like, there's a strong implication.
Sure.
You can argue that the Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance. Glorantha pioneered the idea of a deeply mythic and region-specific fantasy setting, and that is where I think Kryn and Faerun got some of their early starts, was with that same philosophy.
As a designer, you know that we do not exist in a vacuum, right?
Exactly.
So anything that came after 78 that was fantasy related is gonna have some tendrils into RuneQuest, as much as it does Dungeons and Dragons or Tolkien or
right. And then of course the Elder Scroll series, which we mentioned earlier as well.
Well, and I mean the Use It and Grow, like Ultima, the whole Ultima series was based off of that. So like it has been a part of our DNA for a very long time. There was another thing on RuneQuest, that the modern one I wanted to touch on, if you'll allow, Ross.
Please, yeah, go ahead, please. I didn't bring you on here to not talk about RuneQuest.
So the thing that it and Pendragon share that I adore so much that, when I created my own game, that was one of the things I had to put in, was this idea of defining your character's personality. In RuneQuest, it's done based on runes. So you have the 5 elemental runes, and then you have these paired runes that there are, I don't remember if it's 5 or 6 pairs, maybe 7 pairs of runes that are like the man rune versus the beast rune. And these paired runes are all about like helping to define how your character exists in the world and what their personality is like. Pendragon does it with, like sins and virtues, but they call them the personality traits. But in the modern version of RuneQuest and Pendragon, that has been elevated to this, like RuneQuest has always had runes, but now it is this system that like you can look at your character and go, what would my character do? Well, let me look at my runes, or in Pendragon, let me look at my personality traits, and I can help guide myself. It's never a straitjacket. It's never like, oh, your character has this much in this rune, you have to do this thing. No, it's, like if you are unsure, you can look at your character and help make a decision. You get to decide these things when you create the character to begin with, right? But they're guidance, not forced upon you. But I love that you get this sort of like, I always relate it to remember the old Star Trek medical beds, and they had these little sliders that showed all these different things. It's like having sliders for your character's personality that you can look down and be like, oh, well, on this particular axis, my character is more on the man side than the animal side. So, you know, I'm more of a civilized person. I'm more about civilization and that sort of thing. Or I'm far more about nature and being with the animals and being outside. So I'm more beast than man, or, you know, things of that nature. And I just like, it is one of the things that RuneQuest like really that called out to me when I was playing RuneQuest is this helping you define your character's persona, not just your skills and your attributes. And it really makes your character feel like I can hand you a pre-gen character for RuneQuest, and yeah, it's going to have like your character's history and things like that. But those persona traits, those rune traits, will help you to understand like how does this person actually act in situations. What is this role that I'm taking on.
And to wrap up, I think the games influenced by RuneQuest, you have to branch out a little bit into the BRP system. And the BRP system is foundational for Super World, which people would know as the basis of the Wild Cards novels. George R.R. Martin and his group, they played Super World, and then they went home and they wrote all these stories about their superheroes, and that became the Wild Cards books. If you're familiar with them at all, comes off of Super World. And there's Ring World, Larry Niven's setting, which was also BRP. And formative for myself was the ElfQuest role-playing game, which is also based on BRP.
They just re-released the ElfQuest box.
Yeah, I have the original up there, and I'm very big fan of it. One of these days we'll have to talk about ElfQuest because it's a big deal for me. But yeah, and of course this is going to lead us to, I think, one of the most recent BRP products, which is called of Hearth and the Harrowing. And this is a product that you yourself built. And if I may, just looking at it, the vibe I get is very strongly kind of like a mix between Darkest Dungeon and like a D&D adventure. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it is my love letter to early D&D, Darkest Dungeon, OSR inspired gaming of the modern era. My elevator pitch is OSR inspired, BRP based, set in a world of muskets and magic. It is a survival horror fantasy game. Like it is like I grew up cutting my teeth on Ravenloft, right? It was the setting for me. Like I've talked to you, I don't know how many times about Accursed and Gothic horror and all of those things. So this was my I wanted to make something that was what I wanted to play. And BRP was the natural, from all the work I'd done on RuneQuests, on Call of Cthulhu, on various other D100 systems. It was, and when they released the latest version of BRP under the Orc license, it meant that anybody can go out and make a game on BRP engine. It was on OGL before that, but now it's on under the Orc license. So it was just a natural fit for me to use that system to make the game that I released 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, stand up and show us your shirt.
Okay.
This is the of Hearth and the Harrowing shirt. You can see that Darkest Dungeon inspired art style there, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that's the book right there.
So tell us about now. I realize we've gone a long way down the path talking about RuneQuest and what RuneQuest is and how RuneQuest inspired all kinds of things. And you having worked on RuneQuest, I remember you and we sat down and we talked at great length about a Gothic horror role-playing game and what you wanted that to become. And I am so impressed that you took that that core idea that you've been carrying around for so long and turned it into something so interesting. I
still have this other game in my back of my brain where you play the monsters, but this one was more inspired by Darkest Dungeon and games like that. But it's set in a very Gothic feeling, dark kind of world. And I mentioned earlier, there's a direct line between my RuneQuest work and the genesis of what became of Hearth and Harrowing. When I was working on the how to improve your lands as a noble, I was playtesting the stuff that ended up in that book with my playtest group, and my players absolutely loved the, wait, I get to build something that is ours. And like my players are drawing maps on Incarnate of their village. And, they're, even though only two of them one was a priest, one was a noble, they were the only landowners. They were like, oh, well, we have to build a temple for this other person, and we have to build a this for this person. And so they were going through, playtesting what I'd written for Runequest, but my brain was going the whole time about like, these players really love this kind of system. And then, along the way, we've had Forbidden Lands, we've had Mutant Year Zero, all these games that have, this concept of a place that you call home that you can go back to. Savage Worlds, the fantasy companion that came out, there's a holding system in that. I forget what the name of it is. The newest version of 5e has this same sort of like, well, in your downtime, you have a thing that you call your own. And the amount of detail to it is really, really small. And it's not its own kind of subsystem. It is like, it's an adjunct to a downtime system, right? And I wanted something that was a little more involved without being like, I'm tracking how much wood I have and I'm tracking how much stone we have and something like that. And so that became the nugget that started the Hearth part of Hearth and the Harrowing.
And I mean, it sounds so exciting, frankly. I'm really digging it. So the book is now out, like you didn't Kickstarter or anything, right? It's just literally.
I did not. I decided that I was doing enough trying to get a book out that to run a Kickstarter for it was yet another skill set that I would have to learn and understand. And I decided, at least for this one, I was gonna release it and market it and talk to people like you and try to get the word out that it's out there and a thing, but no Kickstarter, not yet.
Well, I again, I didn't know Greg, but I know that as a titan of the industry, I'm sure he's very proud to have inspired so many people, including yourselves, to make your own thing. So if you were to describe it to someone who is not a RuneQuest person, how would you describe of Hearth and the Harrowing?
I mean, what I said earlier is my one-line pitch, right? It's a survival horror fantasy game inspired by OSR, based on BRP, that's set in a world of muskets and magic.
And who are we? What are we doing, and why?
Yeah,
that's the question.
If we want to go deeper than that, you play heroes that are banding together to go out into what is known as the wilds, a land that has been destroyed by an apocalypse known as the Harrowing. 20 years ago, underneath the capital, something rose, and what it touched became mutated. And these mutants flowed out from the capital, killing and mutating everybody they could get their hands on. And refugees spilled out ahead of them, trying to stay away from them. And everything that they touched is now the wilds. And in this land known as Eurasian, it's just a single country. Everything has been corrupted other than 2 cities on the far northern coasts. There's a blockade set up. There are the mountain passes are closed by the countries on the other side of them. And now it is up to the heroes to go into the wild and to set up their own settlement and to carve out something for themselves out of this land of corruption and the wilds that exist out there.
So it's explicitly like you're going out to build the keep on the borderlands, if you will.
Absolutely.
Now this reminds me of that famously Matt Colville produced a book called Strongholds and Followers, I believe. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like exactly that kind of idea. Like, let's go out into the uncivilized wilderness. Let's build a thing and let's start to civilize it. Let's start to bring it into a nation. There's a real strong attraction to that, man builds a thing story. I'm always into that.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure, so having played Forbidden Lands, having played Mutant Year Zero and other games that had this kind of stronghold system, I wanted to make sure that what was available to you in Hearth and Harrowing was a different level and a different. I wanted it to be a true part of the game, that it needs to inspire you as a player to do more things within the game world. So there is a game loop that is created, explicitly called out in the book, of adventuring phase, which is your typical hex crawl, delving into dungeons, into ruins, and that sort of thing. And it takes place in 4-hour chunks and days as you go out and do your thing. And then the Hearth phase, which takes place a week at a time. It can take place with or without your heroes at the Hearth. When the game starts, your heroes have 3 villagers that work for them. So wherever you establish your Hearth, they're still working while you're out adventuring. And so you have this loop of adventuring phase, Hearth phase. If you're off on an expedition, you're not participating in the Hearth during that Hearth phase. But when you come back, if you want to trigger advancement for your character, you have to spend at least 1 Hearth phase in the Hearth. And that triggers advancement for you, allows you to spend time to train up new skills if you want to, or help the villagers build out your Hearth for new things that you're building, or help them work the fields to get food because you need to feed everybody, right? And so you have this game loop, and as video game designers, we know about game loops. Like it's a core concept of like how players interact with the game. You want this loop that will drive them to continue to do things. And then off to the side, you have the harrowing phase. So every 4 Hearth phases triggers a harrowing phase. And this is both the harrowing, trying to take back what you and what your players have built, trying to take a little bit of it back, but it's also a story engine for the game master, right? You roll these random events, and sure, one of them is going to happen at the Hearth, but some of them are happening out there in the wilds. And some of them might, you cleared out a ruins over in this hex over there. Well, the GM generated a new Hearth event or a harrowing event and decides to place it in those ruins. So now those ruins have been reoccupied by somebody else. Too bad you didn't set up a guard post there or something, right? And so you get this adventuring Hearth, and then here comes the harrowing phase to try to tear down your Hearth and take back what you've won. And while it's not going to do that, it's just, it's going to nibble at it a little bit. And then it's also going to lay these adventure seeds for the game master to sprinkle in. So the idea is like, you don't have to go write a whole bunch of adventures. You just need to have this hex crawl and these adventure sites that you're doing, and then let the world kind of run itself and just game master.
It really showcases the strength of that basic roleplay system. This reminds me of some of the things that we were working on for Myth Tales of Legend back in 2018. My God, it's been a while. Yeah, I worked on a game called Myth Tales of Legend. All we ever made was a free RPG Day product called The Lost Barrow, and you can find that at drive-thru if you want to. But there was some mechanics that we were toying around with, were ideas like a campfire where you tell your stories and advance your characters. But you've done a lot more with that idea, and I think it's fantastic. I want to play this game. I really do. Now
I know someone who might run it for you, Ross.
Oh, I bet that's quite possible. We have a couple of questions here.
Sure.
Pacano says, so this is more of a survival game. Are we talking about tracking water and firewood, or is it closer to each character requires a ration per 3 days kind of abstraction?
So it is more the second. You track units. The only things that you track unit-wise are food, trade goods, gold, and obviously survivors. So each unit of food is enough food for one person for 1 week. So every Hearth phase ends with, now mark off a food for every person in your population. Every hero and every villager needs to consume a food. And so it is, so Forbidden Lands, I love Forbidden Lands as a game, but one of the things that they do is you have to go out and mine the ore, and you get some number of hundreds of ore, and you have to go, cut the trees down and track how much timber you have. And I didn't want to get it to that level. I want to use the Hearth as a way to drive adventure and as a way to tell a story with your heroes and the villagers that are relying on them. But I didn't want it to be, accounting the game, right? There are plenty of village simulator computer games. You can go play that. It's not what this is intended for.
It reminds me of Warcraft when you click on the peasant, send him out to collect wood. Yes, me lord.
What?
Right. Yeah, you remember that.
Yeah, you click on them enough times and stop touching me.
Stop touching me. Yeah. Kato says, how high lethality are you expecting in the Hearth and the Harrowing?
So BRP has a very large range of lethality, right? On one end, you've got Call of Cthulhu. Very limited hit points. No magic healing. The only way you can get help is a little bit of first aid and then go into a hospital for weeks and weeks on end, right? On the other end, you have Runequest, where you still have super high lethality, but people have more hit points. There's magic healing. There's healing that can reattach limbs. There's a large breadth between the two. And BRP has some levers you can throw, like double the amount of hit points. Are you using hit locations or not? Right. But at the end of the day, it's still a percentage-based game with an X% chance that like a hit can turn into a crit, and crits can not insta-kill you, but darn near. Right. So if that's the spectrum of Cthulhu to RuneQuest, we're slightly to the right of Cthulhu in a fantasy setting where you have magic. Right. And base BRP rules basically say, if you take a bunch of damage and you go from 0 or negative, then you have until the end of the next round to be brought to 1 hit point. If you do, you're alive. If you don't, you're dead. Right. So once you start dying, you've got that timer of at most a round and a half or a round and 3/4, because something caused that damage to get you to 1. We have healers that have D6 per level of the spell that they're casting heals that can really save your bacon in something like that. But it's still like a single crit with an impaling weapon does max weapon damage times 2. I also, since it's a game that takes place in a muskets and magic style setting, like I upped the damage on muskets and flintlocks because I wanted them to be a little more lethal than what was in base BRP. So like if you get crit with a flintlock, like you're likely going down. How down and how negative you are and whether or not your healer is going to be able to patch you to 1 before you can stand up. Other than 1 TPK, I've had no player deaths in any of my play tests. I got some people that got real close. And, there was even an instance where a playtester went down. Somebody did a first aid special ability that allows them to do first aid in combat, and it still wasn't enough. And the healer priest managed to, at the end of the round they were going to die, trigger a heal spell. Like if he had fumbled that heal spell, it was donezo for that character, but they managed to get it.
Yeah, just to double check, you are talking about player characters, not the players.
Okay. I have, as far as I know, never killed a player.
So would you
That's
say
what
that
I'm sticking to?
Would you say in your game that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer?
Yes, I absolutely would. I know where that quote's from. You just didn't say it in a gravelly enough voice.
No, I don't have that kind of voice. I definitely don't. But that sounds really exciting and interesting. And I do love the idea of going out and building something in the wilds. I have a very strong love of Birthright, which is an old TSR setting.
I remember Birthright.
And it had some rules that were kind of like you could go out and make kingdoms and things like that. But I think the tying it to the hex crawl mechanics and adding that BRP layer over it really helps out, because one of the first things I immediately thought of was you could actually reskin this whole thing for the Border Princes in the old world, or you could reskin it for I don't know, some sort of deep rock galactic space dwarves.
Oh yeah, I have absolutely thought of, if I if this does well enough and I decide to go make another BRP game, that I could reskin Hearth as a pirate game where your Hearth is instead your ship, a space game where your Hearth is instead your ship, and you're bolting on new parts to your ship, and now you have to provide, instead of housing and food, you have to provide power and resources. Like I've got the wheels are turning, man.
Yeah, this is like one of those cartoons where the hungry character smells the food and it's like levitating and their nose is following.
Yep.
That's me. I'm like, that smells amazing. I want more of it. Oh my god, that sounds really cool. Oh, Spelljammer, is one of our guys is saying. Spelljamming time. That would be a really interesting way to do Spelljammer. Yeah, or I agree. That'd be really rad. What else can you tell us about? Well, I guess maybe how many books are there and what's coming out in the future?
So right now there's just the core rulebook. The core rulebook gives you obviously player character generation, all the rules for combat. Now, I took BRP and I streamlined it, kind of going back to that OSR inspired. I wanted to cut some of the bulk out of the book. BRP is a great tool set, but it is a tool set that has a lot of tools that you do not need for every game, right? So I stripped a lot of it down. I made the math faster at the table. There's no double skills in base BRP. There's this idea of if something is easy, double your skill. Well, if I've got a 37% chance, then I'm doing math at the table, which, some of us can rattle off 74 for that, but others at the table are going to be like, wait, I got to do math where I'm carrying the 1 to figure out what my chance of doing something is. And if something is hard, then you're supposed to have it. I got rid of all of that. I got rid of this. There's a concept of special successes, which is in Call of Cthulhu, you can succeed, fail, well, all BRP games, succeed, fail, fumble, critical, and then there's one in between called a special success that is a different percentage based on your rating. I got rid of special successes, made criticals all just 10% of your success chance, and it makes the game flow faster. Like in modern Call of Cthulhu, you write your skill and then you write half your skill and then, 1/20th of your skill, or 1/5 of your skill and 1/20th of your skill, so that you have those numbers pre-written so you don't have to do the math at the table. I got rid of 90% of that math. If something is easy or hard, there's a sliding scale of it's either +20 or +50, -20 or -50. And that way you can just look at the tens digit and apply a little bit of math and not have to really at early versions of the game, it was 25 and 50, but that extra 5% meant people were carrying 1s and doing extra math. And so we made it 20%. Sorry, what was the original question? I got off the rules and streamlining.
It's hilarious.
I know, it was what was in the book. So the rules are all in the book. Character generation. You actually create your character using 2 different professions: your background profession and your adventuring profession. So were you a farmer or a merchant or a noble or whatever before you became an adventurer? And then what's your hero profession? Are you a duelist? Are you a witch? Are you a witch hunter? Are you a zealot? Are you, so there's a list of a bunch of different professions. And like I said earlier, that is just guiding your character generation, where you put your skill points. It doesn't mean that's what you do for the rest of your character's career. Once you exit character generation, you do whatever you want. And then we have the bestiary, of course. The mutants created by the Harrowing are called the Corrupted. So there's a bunch of different Corrupted within the book for you to fight. Their big bosses are called Corruptors. So the Corruptors create Corrupted by going out and spreading the corruption and mutating other things. There's a little bit of not sanity mechanic. There's some of that too, but there's this idea of corruption. It harkens back to the old Ravenloft rules, where if you did bad things, you got noticed by the dark powers. Mm-hmm. Well, as you interact with the Corrupted, if they get their grubby paws on you, then you might gain a little bit of what's called ruin. And if you gain too much ruin, then you might increase your corruption stat. If your corruption stat ever goes higher than your POW or your con, you mutate into a Corrupted and the game master takes your character. So got to watch that corruption stat and make sure it doesn't go too hog wild. After the rules, there's a little bit on the setting. I didn't want the setting to be a big focus, but there's a few page spreads on religion and the setting in general of the corrupted land of Erasian. And then there is a 19 hex region, and 19 sounds like a very strange number, but if you put 19 hexes in a hex pattern, they make a big hex, right? And so there are the land of Erasians divided into 7 regions. Each one is 19 hexes. So the first of those is in the core book. It's called the Western Wilds, and it is your introduction to the wilds themselves. The idea is your characters have embarked on a ship from one of the 2 northern cities, and they land on the shores of the Western Wild, and that's where they're going to set up their hearth. And you have the whole 19 hexes described, random encounter tables for things you might find there. And then there's a single adventure site, which is called the Ruins of Karis, which can either be, if you and your players want to just set up your hearth immediately, you could do so like right there on the shores of the Western Wild. There's a river that has fresh water. It would be a perfect place to set up a hearth. But you have nothing to start with. You just have your 3 villagers, your however many heroes, a wagon, and a horse. Or off on these hills that you can see from the wilds, there's a set of ruins. And you come later to find that those are the ruins of Karis. And so your heroes can journey to the ruins and clear the ruins of the monsters, and then you can use that as the basis of your hearth. And so you start with this set of ruins, which gives you some roofs over your head, but nothing much more. And then you can use that to build up faster, but you have to clear the beasties out of it before you can do it. And so there's a whole dungeon delve adventure site there with ghosts and a big horrific dog monster called the Hound of Karis, harking back to Hound of Baskerville sort of inspiration, and so forth, that you can dig into as your first adventure. If you don't use it for your hearth to set up as your hearth, then like it is right there, only a couple hexes away for you to use as your first big adventure if you want to go delving into a dungeon.
I've often said that role-playing games are really a great way to learn different disciplines. For me, for example, the old Champions game had a lot of algebra and basic math and fractions. And like I learned how to total up dice on a tabletop very, very quickly. Also, my vocabulary expanded greatly with Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I aced all of my extra credit vocabs because I was like, hey, I know how to spell Dweomer and I know how to spell dice.
You know what a Thorpe is.
Right? Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. And so listening to you talk about this game and how you came about with the mechanics and how you decided to modify BRP to match, it expresses, I think, like an underlying strength of tabletop game design that is very unlike what you'd see in, say, a systems designer for a video game, where they also deal with like statistics and very granular numbers. But for a tabletop game, it's more intuitive than anything else. Like you were talking about how your playtesters reacted, how they hesitated to do certain calculations, and you're like, okay, well, I can make that a less burdensome a less burdensome activity, basically, right, by taking away some of the things. That's what I think is really great about like game design, and probably you could bring this all the way back to Runequest and talk about how the basic system of Runequest and how that has built is in a way reflects a naturalistic idea of how people approach the mechanics.
Yeah, and modern gaming has come through such a big arc, right? And there are so many different kinds of games that are now available. When you look at something like Apocalypse World games, Savage Worlds, 5th edition, like there are all these different levels of crunch, levels of accessibility. And while this is, like I've always said, in-character games is a game studio that is intended to make games for experienced players. I also want them to be accessible enough that if you want to bring in newer players, that they're going to have a good time with it. And making the math, like the math is not undoable or like hard when
Right.
you're playing a base BRP game. But if it's that much more I have to think about that's preventing me from telling a cool story and isn't actually contributing to like the story's outcome in a meaningful way, then I want to strip it away. Like there is all this stuff about personas and being inspired and making extra rolls and augmenting, and all of this stuff is still there. But just by removing that 5%, I made it that much faster for you to get to that decision, right? And that's why I felt like BRP is a great rule set. You know, I built the game on it, and I stand by that decision. But like shaving off some of the, it's not even rough bits, just extra complexity that doesn't have to be there for the game to be fun, lets me put that complexity somewhere else. I created a whole system about building a hearth and a tech tree where you have to have this building before you can have this building, and they have to all be manned before you can build these other buildings. And like, if I'm going to use cognitive load on that, I need to shave it off of something else. Right. And so things like that extra 5%, things like the doubling and the half of the math was what I did to make the system run faster. So then I could apply that system across the board, whether it's to the Hearth phase, the adventuring phase, the Harrowing phase. They all kind of use the same systems. So having that core be faster and easier just allowed me to do more with it.
Is there, and I have to ask because obviously, a lot of my experiences with things like Dark Heresy, is there a really cool critical hit system? Can I inflict a dizzying blow to both body and brain?
Yes. So BRP has 2 damage systems. You can either use total hit points or hit locations. Hit locations, Runequest uses that. It is, did I lop your arm off or not? Right? If I hit you in the arm hard enough, how much armor do you have in that location? And that level of simulation and deep dive, was not what Hearth and the Harrowing was about. So I said, okay, we're going to use this other side. And that other side comes with a chart that's called the major wound table. So if you take half of your health or more in a single hit, then you have triggered a major wound. And same thing if you do it to a bad guy, right? Every single one of the entries on the major wound table costs you characteristic points. The lower entries on it are D3. The higher entries on it are D6. And then the final entries are multiple characteristics taking damage. So it'll be something like facial scarring minus D3 charisma. So when that wound, you mark that wound down as some number of damage. I've taken 6 points of damage that caused a horrible scar on my cheek, and I lost 2 points of charisma. Right? When that wound is healed, you make a luck roll, which is based off your POW. If you succeed in that luck roll, the whatever it is goes away, and you get your characteristic points back. If you fail that luck roll, then whatever you took is permanent, and you just are down, in that case, the charisma. And all of the attributes, like there are ones for arms and legs and strength damage and dex damage and constitution damage and intelligence damage from getting your bell rung and all of that stuff in the major wound table.
Right. But if I am healed, I am at least soothed and sedated.
Yes. And you might get those points, those characteristic points back that you lost. And there's ways that you can over time train your characteristics to get points back in them. So it's not lost forever, but
that's really cool. I dig it a lot. So we have a comment here from Wesloose. Unless it's true, your right eye, then you get the MMA protagonist bonus.
there's actually a whole chart that I wrote on the mental side of things to match the major wound. So if you see something really scary or something attacks your mental fortitude, then there's a chart there, and some of those give you new passions, which is kind of like the Runequest runes. We have what are called passions, so the things that your character cares about, and that chart can give you new passions like a phobia or something of that nature.
Well, the passions sound really interesting, so I'd like to know more about those.
Yeah, so character generation is really 4 questions. Now there's like a 12-step, like do this, do this, do this, do this. But like there's 4 questions. What ancestry are you? What were you before you became a hero? What profession were you before you became a hero? What caused you to become a hero? What is your inciting incident? And what sort of hero are you now? Once you answer those 4 questions, everything else is just assigning points and that sort of thing. And those 4 things give you not ancestry, but the other 3 give you 3 of your 4 starting passions. There are suggestions in the book as to what that might be. So if you're playing a priest, your passion is likely going to be something like devotion to the god that you're a priest of. If you're playing a duelist, it might be something to do with helping others or fighting duels for other people. Maybe it's your honor. Maybe it's your the love of the duel or something of that nature. So you pick a passion based on those 3 areas that kind of define your character, and you get them at some percentage rating. Then after everybody's characters are created, you sit around the table with your fellow players and you make connections to other players. And based off of those connections, you get a 4th passion. So it might be in the pre-generated characters, there are a couple of characters that the dwarven mercenary saved Hamish, the halfling surgeon's life at one point. So Hamish has loyalty to Gareth, the dwarven mercenary, and vice versa. Anytime you're doing anything, if you fail a roll, if you can relate it to your passion, you can trigger the passion. You just check a box next to it that says used, and you can re-roll the roll. You only get those passion uses back when you either return to the hearth and spend a hearth phase, and when doing so, the game masters works with you going around the table being, what do you do to reinvigorate your passion? Right? Oh, I go spend time as Hamish. I go spend time with Gareth, and we cook a good meal together. Okay, you get back your usage of that passion. You can also do this during an adventuring phase if there's something that really stands out that makes it appropriate. So you find your priest to the god Erasmus, and you find a shrine to Erasmus that is broken down and lost in the wild, and you spend a day fixing up the shrine. Oh, well, if your devotion to Erasmus has already been used, you can get it back for doing that, right? So the passions they're kind of a luck point, Benny, whatever you want to call it from your favorite game system to allow you to redo something, but you only get the 4 usages per adventuring phase.
And this feels to me very inspired by some of the mechanics in Pendragon, which I think is great. Mm-hmm. That's Absolutely. One of my favorite bits about Pendragon. You can clearly see the pedigree of Hearth and the Harrowing coming from Runequest and filtered through things like Pendragon and stuff like that.
There's really also fun. In your persona section, besides your passion, there are the personality traits. I picked different ones than what Pendragon uses. They're all in the BRP book as options. The personality ones is like a section in the NPC side section that's like, here's how you could define your NPCs and here's how you could use them for PCs. And I was like, yes, give me that. I remember Pendragon. I want that as a core part of my game. But there are things like civilized versus exploration. Do I want to, am I an isolationist or somebody who likes to be around others? These sorts of things. And there's 5 or 6 pairs of them.
Now, we did spend some time talking about some of the unusual aspects of Glorantha, some of the stranger, weirder things. Do you have some really fun Easter eggs or weirdness that exists in your game that you'd like to play?
Absolutely. Like the core of the game is about telling spooky stories about corrupted stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You go looking around when you're hex crawling around the Western Wilds, you're running into the corrupted, which I should have provided you a picture you could flash up on the screen, but they're kind of Resident Evil / Dragon Age, like horribly mutated tendrils, mouths in strange places, things like that. If there is a creature from mythology that is this crossed with this of Hearth and the Harrowing, that's a corrupted. created by corruption. So harpies are a corrupted creature, minotaurs are a corrupted creature, but they're not going to be like, stacked buff minotaur man dude that like kind of looks cool. He's going to be horrible, right? So the corrupted are kind of where I get to really tell the spooky stories and really kind of up the scare factor. There's a tree that you can find in one of the hexes that if you touch it, little tendrils of corruption grow out of the tree and begin to embed themselves in your skin. And the longer you let them burrow into your skin, the more damage you're going to take if you try to rip it off. I had a player put their ear up to the tree one time. And so you can imagine how that went. And so it's things like that. And like, if you stand there long enough, nobody's going to do it as a player, but if you stood there long enough, eventually the tree consumes you. And once you are fully enveloped by the tree, obviously you die of suffocation and that sort of thing. But if the players discover the nature of the tree, everybody has burned the tree once they discover that it's corrupted. And once they burn the tree, it reveals ancient, now burnt corpses and the stuff that was left behind. And so things about like that is where the horror aspect comes in. It's all about the corruption and your fight against the corruption. And the spoiler part is that those two cities in the north completely corrupted as well, right? Everybody that you find, most likely they've been corrupted at some point. There are some people that are, out there. One of the other inspirations behind the game was the Walking Dead series, right? This idea of the land is beset by this horrible plague, and we are the people that are going to try to bring it back. We're going to try to make settlements out in the wild. So you get that kind of like finding other settlers. Are they going to be good? Are they going to be corrupted? Are they going to try to take our stuff? Like, what are they? And you even begin to, in the Western wilds, there's an abbey, and the abbot is a corruptor, right? That is, welcomes you with open arms to come into the abbey and to drink the wine that they grow just over on the next hill. And, I've had players buy barrels of wine off of them before they realized that, all of it was corrupted and horrible. And then, of course, they go back with pitchforks and torches and are like, you sold us corrupted wine, you must be corrupted. And then big fights happen and his true nature is revealed and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's the land is really dark, and there's all sorts of fun stories to tell when you have this blight of this corruption that you can just twist things however you want to twist them and make fun, dark stories that you can tell.
Yeah, I could definitely see the underlying darkest dungeon of it all. Maybe with a hint of American McGee's Alice in Wonderland, maybe there as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see you're nodding your head. Yeah. I love it. That's really, really cool. So thanks for that Easter egg of the trees eating.
One of the creatures that I enjoyed working with the artists the most for is called a Titanic corruptor. And this is corruptors are the things that spew corruption and make other people into corrupted, or animals or places. A Titanic corruptor is a kaiju size corruptor, and there are only 2 of them. And there's a system in the harrowing phase that determines what hex they move to next. And the picture of them in the book, like the thing is like this tall, and you can see buildings underneath it that are like this big. And these Titanic corruptors walk on these big spindly legs, and they have tentacles that reach to the ground. And wherever they go, they consume everything they can put their tentacles on. And then about every 12 hours, they just spew forth nothing but corruption and corrupted things. So those live near the old ruined capital, and there's a system to like move them around the map to see how much they've spread. And eventually, hopefully, your players get powerful enough that maybe they're going to take one of those on one day.
That is awesome. It reminds me a little bit of a setting you and I brainstormed a while back.
Yep.
Which
I won.
Yeah. God, that was fun. I would love to work with you again on something like this. This sounds amazing.
Absolutely.
I'm really glad. Like I remember, again, this is Jared and I have known each other for a number of years, and I remember when Jared first came to me, he says, "Hey, I want to do something with the Gothic horror setting," and to see where that has led you is fascinating, and it's part of what's so amazing about the act of creation with role-playing games, because you can write a novel, you can write a script for a movie and things like that, and that's really cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's the aspect of the interactivity of a role-playing game that makes the creativity just require one little extra step that actually adds a whole new flavor to it, right? And building this world of the Hearth and the Harrowing with these concepts of the corruption and the hearths and things like that, the mission, there's that impetus, the push to go out there and settle it, that it scratches an itch you just can't get out of your typical book or movie, because it's something that you are choosing to do, and the world will respond to how you choose to interact with it.
Yeah.
So I love that.
I had somebody ask me on, I don't remember if it was Reddit or a BRP forum or something. They said, well, why would the heroes ever leave the Hearth? I mean, other than the obvious, well, they're adventurers and it's a RPG and you want to have adventures. Like, why would they leave the safety of the Hearth once they've established it to go out into the wilds and go do this stuff? And the answer is, like, you quickly become resource bound by the number of people you have. 3 villagers is not a lot. And yeah, the 6 of you and your 3 villagers can survive on your own in a Hearth for a while, but you quickly, every group I've run into, every group I've played, they've run into the same thing. We're like a Hearth phase or 2 in, they're like, crap, we need more people. We got to go find more survivors. And so that population almost then becomes another resource that you're managing. Well, if we're going to bring more people back, because we need more people to work in fields and to be the blacksmith and to work in this building or work in that building, we're going to need to make more food. And so you get this cycle of, well, we need more people to do more things, but if we're going to do more people, then we need more food, and we have to have more places for them to sleep, and this cycle of and it just naturally pushes players, from a game system perspective, to be like, oh, well, I see what you've done with the Hearth phase, and I see how I can play this as a game, and it's going to force me to go on an adventure. Yeah,
anybody who's played Fallout 4 and built a settlement, it knows exactly what this is about. We've got a fun comment here from Wesley. He says, if you don't go out and adventure, the wilds come to you.
That's right. That's the harrowing phase. And it can be brutal if you don't prepare for it.
So let's talk about that harrowing phase a little bit. Like, I understand the adventuring phase. That's basically every role-playing game, right? You go out, you do cool things. The Hearth phase is pretty understandable. You come home, you build up your defenses, you establish more resources, you cultivate your settlement. What is the harrowing phase, and how does that work?
So to explain the harrowing phase, I first have to explain a system that I added every game I've ever played since 4th edition D&D has had this in some way, shape, or form, and that is a challenge system. Right. So 4th edition D&D, for as much as people loved it or hated it, it introduced to Dungeons and Dragons the idea of skill challenges. Now, people have done it in various different ways. Savage Worlds has its version. What is it? Dramatic task.
Yeah, dramatic task resolution. And the pedigree of that goes back to Torg. The original Torg from the late 80s, early 90s.
Sure. And so BRP didn't have one. And I wanted to have a way that I can quickly turn a fumble while you're exploring. I had people like, while you're exploring the hexes, there's these different roles you take on, and you make rolls to see, like, oh, am I navigating? Am I the guy driving the cart? Am I, what am I doing? I've triggered challenges based off of like a fumble while trying to cross a river with the wagon. I've had challenges. Sometimes I have a room set up that is a fight, and we just got out of a fight, and I don't want to run another fight. I'll just turn it into a challenge. And so having this in my back pocket to be able to, run a fun narrative encounter that allows the players to have a risk, a way to take heroic sacrifices, to do more things in the encounter, and maybe a reward depending on what it is they're doing. And I used all of that in the harrowing phase. So there's a big 2-page chart of harrowing events. The bigger your settlement is, the bigger your hearth is, you add to your percentage roll on that chart. And you do some number of rolls, the number of hearths you have, plus I believe it's a D3 of rolls on this chart. And if you have more than one hearth, which you can, the rules allow you to like set up multiple settlements eventually. You're going to assign one of these harrowing events to every hearth, and then any that you have left over, the game master gets to put wherever they want to, like I said earlier, to expand on what's happening in the world and to provide story seeds for you. But that harrowing event table has all sorts of events, from rats in the granary to a mythic beast comes through the area, to a herd of corrupted, or a corruptor and his herd of corrupted that are with him come through the area, to refugees, to bad weather, so there's all of these 2 pages worth of different events, and each one details what level is the challenge. Is it a simple challenge? Is it a hard challenge? Is it a very hard challenge? Is it a complex challenge where complex challenges are, instead of just having to make some number of successes over some number of rounds, the number increases every round. So you're fighting against an opposing force. So all that is detailed in the harrowing event chart. Like, for this particular event, it's this kind of challenge. What is the risk? If you don't succeed in the challenge, this is what you will lose. Normally in challenges, like when you're in the adventuring phase, it is like, it's clear what you will lose. You're going to take some damage, or, in the case of the floundering wagon, your wagon and everything in it is going to wash down river, something of that nature. In the harrowing phase, now we're at the hearth level. So the risks include things like damage to buildings, injured villagers, losing trade goods, losing food, all that sort of thing, losing gold. And so you have to run this narrative event for your players, where you narrate, this is what's happening. There's, one of the villagers comes to you and tells you that he's seen rats in the granary. So we've got to do something about it. How are we going to possibly get all the rats out of the granary? So now each of the players need to come up with, how am I going to contribute to getting the rats out of the granary? If it's a multi-round challenge, you can also change the flavor of the challenge each round. So, you've now discovered where the rats are in the granary. Now you have to actually deal with them. So now your skills might have to change from discovery to combat, or to getting rid of the rats, or something of that nature. Anyways, over the challenge, you can take sacrifices, you can take damage, and you might gain something along the way. Probably not in the case of rats in the granary, but like if there's bandits that attack, if you win, you're gonna probably gain some reputation for having taken the bandits out. You're gonna gain some trade goods as you have the weapons that they lost, and things of that nature that you can trade to other settlements if you want. Maybe they had money on them, that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of there's some risk, there's some sacrifices you can take during the challenge, and then there's the reward at the end.
They will call me the Rat Slayer.
That's right.
I will have that reputation. No, that sounds really great. And I want to make it clear to everybody that this is not Jared just like taking Runequest and saying, cool, I'm going to make my own with hookers and blow. There is a thing called basic role playing, and basic role playing is essentially the engine that drives Call of Cthulhu. It's the engine that drives Runequest, and it became its own generic RPG. In fact, if you didn't know, there is a basic role-playing SRD that Chaosium published back in 2020. So if you're out there and you're like, hey, I would like to make my own cool game that uses Runequest mechanics, you can. It's a slightly more streamlined edition. There's a thing called the ORC license, ORC. Mm-hmm. This I think Jared mentioned that earlier. And it is designed to be a very clear and modern base for new genres and community products. So Runequest continues to inspire, continues to be a source of creativity in the tabletop world. And yeah, if you like what you hear on this show, go out there and take a look at the basic role playing universal game engine under the ORC license.
Everything in that book, the entire text of that book, is open source through the ORC license, right? You can, don't do this, but you could take the whole thing, take all of it, have a 200-page book, and then add the pieces and parts that you need for your game and publish it. Now, obviously, it is a ton of tools. You don't want to use them all. You want to find the parts that are right for the game that you're making. But like the whole text is available to licensees, and you don't have to get approval or anything. It is just open source license. They also just released a really great creature book. So this is the basic role-playing creatures. So it's a whole thick book full of new monsters for me to corrupt and make into awful things for my players to run into. But BRP Universal Game Engine, definitely check it out.
I mean, you could make your own cattle wrestling simulator if you really
That's right.
With ducks.
Yes. Now, so there's one caution I want to like throw out there. It's like, while Runequest and Call of Cthulhu at their core is BRP, you cannot go make a BRP game and have runes and use the Runequest IP.
Right.
The Orc license is only for BRP. It is not for RuneQuest. It's not for Call of Cthulhu. There is a sanity mechanic, for example, in BRP that is different, based on, but different than the Call of Cthulhu sanity mechanic. You cannot use the Call of Cthulhu sanity mechanic in your BRP game and still fall into the Orc license. So they've definitely, they've open sourced all of BRP, and there's a ton in the BRP book for you to use. But just that slight caution, there are pieces of their IP that are still theirs.
Yeah, the term we like to use on this channel is it must be legally distinct.
Yes.
It's legally distinct.
Because personality traits, passions, they were all optional rules in BRP. While it looks a lot like Pendragon, when you look at it on paper, it's part of the open license. So it was easily able for me to use it in Hearth and Harrowing.
That's amazing. I love everything about this. I want to get a copy of it. That's another question is like, what are you planning to do for expansions in the future, if any?
Sure. So each of those, I said there were 7 regions. Each of those 7 regions is 19 hexes. I'm going to put out a book for each region. There will be, right now, the plan is 32 pages, and that will include a region, a new adventure site that is detailed like 8 or 10 pages about a specific site. And there will probably be like a 1-pager or 2-pager for a couple other adventure sites, full encounter tables for that region. And if there's new rules that I need to put out, like I think in this first one, I may put cannons and how cannons affect hearths and the buildings, or maybe ritual magic. So I've started work on that first expansion. The adventure site is done. It's part of what I ran at Chaosium Con, and I'll run at Chupacabra Con this year, is the first 2 adventure sites after the core book. And so that's underway. And then once I put out all of the 7 regions, this is plans upon plans, right? It depends on how the game does, but I could do a whole book on just the ruins of the capital. I could bundle all of these various, if they're 32 pages, which is the plan, I could bundle all of them into a new hardback that is the Land of Erasion, and it has all of it in one place if you want to collect it that way instead of the individual soft cover, module sized editions. People love adventures, so putting out more adventure sites that you can either put in specific places within regions that already exist, or even allow you to drop them wherever you want, because corruption is everywhere. All sorts of stuff that we can expand on as we go forward.
That's really cool. I think you probably could look back and see things like and see like the big gulf, say, between the name recognition of Runequest and Call of Cthulhu, right? Because Call of Cthulhu was kind of the first mythos game. It was certainly one of the first horror games, and it made such a big splash that everyone kind of is like, oh, Call of Cthulhu, like they know it really well. Whereas Runequest and all of the things that follow on from it, I think sadly, I think it just was kind of a victim of D&D taking up all the air in the room, as a fantasy setting. So, nowadays, if you want to get your game noticed, if you want to get people talking about it, you have to put like a lot of marketing effort behind it, or generally speaking, what most people like to do is they do like a Kickstarter or something. Do you have any big plans for getting people more aware of the Hearth and Harrowing or
I'm paying for some marketing right now. I'm not paying a ton for it. The reason I didn't, so Kickstarters are a weird two-edged sword, in my opinion, right? How do you get an audience? You run a Kickstarter. What do you need before you run a Kickstarter? An audience, right? If you run a Kickstarter and you don't have an audience already built in, then the size of the Kickstarter is dramatically limited. Now, you can throw advertising money at that problem, but it's also, like I said earlier, it was an entire other skill set that I would need to learn on how to run a Kickstarter and how to do that right. And so I decided I would just start with paid advertising, and I have a YouTube channel I started that has languished for a few months because I've been too busy getting the book out, that I'm going to go back to creating more videos for the YouTube channel, just specifically on just Hearth and Harrowing. I have social media, I have a Discord server, and I'm paying for some social media ads at a very small level right now just to get through this initial launch phase. And then once all of my friends have bought their copies they want, all the playtesters have bought the copies that they want if they want to buy one, and all the people that learned about it at Chaosium Con, and then I can start testing things like, if I put more money into advertising, does it make sense? Right. From the video game industry, cost of acquisition of user versus what they're spending. Like, I've got to balance those numbers to make sure that I'm not spending more per day on average than I'm pulling in from sales of the book. Because my goal in the end is not to replace my day job. It's to self-sustain the production of more material for the game, pay for the cost of the art for the game. All of the art was, hand drawn, no AI art, no AI writing. And so, I had to pay an artist to do all this. I had to learn layout to make this book happen. And I did all the writing myself. And like I said, I've been doing that for many years already. So, the old, well, I'm about to get off on a tangent, but that's to answer your question. Yeah, it's the plan right now is continue to support it with some advertising, doing podcasts, doing shows like this, and, doing cons, shows, events, local game stores, events, demo days, things like that, just to get as many people aware as possible.
Now, for our audience, I hope you guys aren't feeling like this is too inside baseball, but part of the role-playing industry is actually like, how do you get your idea from inside your head to being a book that's in people's hands? That's the production side, which is
such a ton of work.
It is, and it is. It's actually like the hardest part, and it's also like the most necessary part is getting from A to B right along that line. So I feel like it's worth discussing, especially with Jared being here, who is a owner operator of his particular branch off of BRP. So forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but one thing that occurs to me is that, of course, anybody who's been a part of Chaosium's Kickstarters, you could potentially reach out to Chaosium and ask them to just put an update on one of their Kickstarters, send out that message to everybody who's ever bought either BRP or Glorantha.
Yeah, they don't do a ton of Kickstarters anymore. They do some.
Right, but all they have to do is an update on the page and it gets sent out.
Yeah, so last weekend, was it last weekend? Not this one we just had. The weekend before that was Chaosium Con US. So I was there. I put the book into various Chaosium super fans, Chaosium, people that work there, and it was super well received. Like, they really loved what they saw. And this last week, if you're a fan of Chaosium, follow them on socials. Like, they on Saturday blasted check this game out to all their socials.
Nice.
Mentioned that I was a writer from Cthulhu and Runequest days, and that I'd put out my own thing. So they are absolutely helping to support in their way.
Okay, well that's great, because that would have been like one of my first stops. So it would have been like, hey, can you guys just bump your Kickstarter?
Yeah, and Neil, the CEO of Chaosium, had tons of advice for me. Hey, make sure you're on this forum, which is who uses forums anymore, but apparently BRP fans do. So that was added to my list of places to go and talk about the game. And so tons of feedback, tons of positive feedback, and willingness to help make sure the game's a success.
Yeah, I think like me, you are a man of a certain age, and thus when you think about the internet and you think about how to engage with people on the internet about role-playing games, our brains are old, and we think about things like forums or even Usenet, which I brought up in the episode last week. We talked about Usenet. We think about forums, we think about like BBSs and things like that. Whereas I think the more modern aspects of the internet and marketing reach is more along the lines of TikToks and along the lines of podcasts, for example, or shows like this one.
Yep.
It has.
I'm going to be making reels to push on my both on my socials and YouTube, and one of the places that it almost feels like a throwback is Reddit. Has been very positive. It feels like a throwback to forum days, but it's been super positive, and I've gotten lots of great feedback from people over on Reddit.
I am actually a big Reddit user, a big fan of Reddit. I mean, that is probably just men of our certain age that get there. But yeah, that's interesting stuff. Now, I did want to go back because we had some interesting questions early in the chat, and one of these was from Stefan Roy. I believe Stefan unfortunately had to leave the show because it was too late his time, but the question he asked was, can you share a quick, cool fact about one of your homebrew worlds?
Well, I'm going to ask you, Ross, does Hearth and the Harrowing count as a homebrew world, or do I need to pick a different one? Because I've got plenty I could talk about, but I'm going to let you make the umpire decision on that one.
I think in the spirit of the question, he's homebrew would be something that you have not yet published.
Okay. So I will pick on Storms of Aurelia is a setting that I have considered publishing that hasn't made it out the doors yet. It is an airship fantasy game where it's a very high fantasy, high heroic, all takes place on airships, and the world beneath you is actually broken up into flying rocks and land islands, but there's no central core planet. It's supposed to be over the top of a gas giant. So imagine a gas giant with a bunch of Earth-like rocks floating at various different levels, and you have to hop on your airship to go from area to area. But one of the things that I added that I loved about that setting was not only do you have airships, but you have personal flyers. So they could be like a wingboard or a mount, like a winged mount. And so imagine big airships, and they launch their flight of wyvern riders or griffin riders to attack the other airship while they're also using cannons on each other and things of that nature. So it was a high fantasy airship setting, and I was really, really stoked about the whole flyer system. And harking back to, I did a little bit of work, one adventure on Star Trek Adventures, that whole like your ship as a part of the game. And making sure that everybody has something they can do on the ship, no matter what kind of role they play in the normal adventuring party. So are you, helping with engineering to make the ship fly faster? Are you manning the guns with the crew? Are you part of the crew that repels boarders or attacks other ships? Or are you the helmsman? Or are you, having all these different roles where you can, make sure that in any situation your character is still going to be involved.
And again, I mean, it strikes me that Hearth and the Harrowing could easily be reskinned into exactly that, which is pretty great, honestly. I'm curious, like, what would you do to adapt the Hearth phase to something like a ship?
Yeah, so the Hearth doesn't move for obvious reasons, right? It's a village, right? But if you take all of the same systems and then skin them in, okay, what size ship do we have? Are we expanding the size of the ship? How many sailors do we have? What kinds of sailors are there? In Hearth and the Harrowing, you have villagers that then specialize into different village roles. So I'm a miner, I'm a blacksmith, I'm a farmer, I'm a leather worker, I'm a guard, whatever it is. And then they have a percentage. They all start as like villager, 25%. Anything they need to do, 25%. That's their skill to do it. So if you want to bring a villager along with you in the adventuring phase and they want to get in a fight, they have a 25% across the board, which is, better than most PCs on things that they aren't trained in. And then they specialize in these various roles. Well, same thing could happen on a ship. Oh, you're a Marine. Then you're not just a sailor, you're now a Marine, or you're a gunner, or you're a helmsman. And so the same systems allow you to play out, like, what is your crew. And then when it comes to things like the systems of the ship as opposed to the buildings of a hearth, like what are our sails? What is our cargo hold? What are our crew quarters? What is our weapons complement? And what is our armor like? And instead of building village defenses like walls and a keep and a tower, you're building up your armor of your ship. You're building your helm to be better so you can turn faster, or your sails to be bigger so you can, catch the wind better. And, you can easily start seeing how you can modify those systems to work on the other side.
Nice.
Still have to feed everybody. Still have to have some place for everybody to sleep.
Well, now we're in the last, we've reached the last part of our show here. So I think we might want to go back just a little bit and maybe give some of our final thoughts on Runequest, which is, again, the building block of your game, of a ton of different other games. I think for me, I'm going to say the 6 things that are most interesting to me about Runequest. The deeply mythic, setting-driven world. Just love it. Love all the weirdness as well. That's a part of it. The cult-driven hero quests and the ducks and the runes. So the second thing is the skill-based progression without any levels. It's what you do is what it gets better over time. No classes, no levels. Learning by doing. It feels organic. It encourages players to specialize in things that matter to the story, not just what's on their character sheet, which is really cool. The third thing I think that I like about it is the deadly and tactical combat, which we did briefly touch on. But I think I like the description of it in your game, which I would say is a distillation of that.
Yeah.
An evolution, if you will. So in a BRP driven game, I would probably think twice before I initiated combat.
Oh yeah. I'm going to derail you for a minute since we still have some time. Like, we didn't touch on it, and everybody should be aware that, like, BRP games can be very swingy. They can be very deadly because you always have a 1% chance to roll a 1, right? If you've got a critical of just 3%, you're still 3% chance that you're going to crit. And that same thing applies when the monsters are attacking you, right? The amount of times when, big fights have swung on a critical, it happens all the time. You think, 3%, that's nobody's ever going to roll that. Well, how many times does somebody roll a 1 or a 20 on a D20? That's 5%, right? So we're not far off, right? It happens all the time. And in a system where, you've got 10 to 15 hit points and somebody's doing a D8, maybe a D8 plus 1. But when they crit, they max that and double it and bypass your armor, which is armor in BRP games are damage resistance effectively. Like, crits end combats for the opposing combatant most of the time. Like, it is really, really deadly. And I've always talked about, like, the smallest trollkin in Runequest can end a hero's career, right? Because they're just using a spear, but that's an impaling weapon, and they roll that crit on you and you fail to defend, like, they are doing major damage. And in that case, it's hit location based. So where is that major damage going? Did they hit you in the stomach, the chest? Did they do major impaling damage to your chest? Is it an arm? If you take too much damage to a limb, that limb is either useless permanently disabled or lopped off, right? So like a trollkin can ruin a hero's day, and they're just tiny little goblin-like creatures, right? Now apply that to a full-size troll or a great troll or something. Like it gets worse and worse when those criticals happen and the monsters are bigger. So yeah, RuneQuest is definitely a game where you've got a lot of magic to backstop you and to help you, but you want to think before you get into that fight. And you want to make sure you have the tactical advantage you can and really consider, do I need to be in this fight?
I love that. That is absolutely one of the things I am taking away from this discussion that I think I really like. I also really like the parallel magic systems in RuneQuest, like the spirit magic versus the rune magic. And there's even more. Like I think you just touched on the
shamanism, sorcery.
Yeah. And each of these they have different philosophies and different cultures associated with them. The magic is tied into the cults, it's tied into the runes. So characters, they can reach into that mythic world through the worship or through the reenactment of a myth, the hero quest. And it's not just your spellbook or your daily slots, which I get a kick out of that. Hey, we've got a super chat here from Sarmelian Bloodweaver. Love that. Me seeing Tapirmen. Neat. Reading Tapir lore. Oh no! Okay. So what's the Tapirmen from? What is this he's referencing?
I'm not familiar with the lore behind it. You know, RuneQuest has lots of different creatures and lots of different places. So,
oh man, we got stumped here. Okay, I'll have to.
So there are some tribes in the Prax area near the big rubble that are basically herd creatures that, you know, different tribes would herd different kinds of creatures, including probably they won the bet on who eats who.
The Moropanth, I believe, is the name of the people.
Yeah. There's even a tribe of people a tribe that raises humans as their
Oh, I see. Okay, so what they're herding is the issue, right? Because they're herd beasts, the herd things.
Yeah, there's one tribe that uses humans as herd beasts.
Yeah, that's these guys.
And mounts.
Oh my god. But they're not sapient. They're not like actual people. They just look like people.
Correct.
Okay, well that is a little
creepy. Sort of people. Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah, that's that would make me think twice.
Yeah.
We got Simile Blue Weaver. Terrifying. So they got magic that's the opposite of a D&D awakened spell. Ooh.
Yeah.
They can make things non-sapient. Yikes.
And this
that is scary.
You know, high myth stuff. Like, how did this even come to happen? Right.
Wow, that is fantastic. Thank you, Sir Million Blowweaver, for pointing those guys out, because that was what I missed in my research. And even Jared was like, oh, what are those? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah, those.
Wow. RuneQuest, man. I mean, it's got a lot. Like I was saying, it's got a lot going for it. And,
did you hit your whole 6? Did you finish your list?
I think the last.
You said 6 things, so I want to make sure.
I did. I just wanted to double check. The everyone is a little bit magical thing is something I really dig, and the last is the focus on the passions and the cults and the community, having such a passionate community of fans. There's the 6th one.
There's a thing called a whiter, and I think it's WYTER, which, like, in a community, you can have your shaman bind a spirit to a thing that becomes your protective spirit for your town. So it's called a whiter, and it can be summoned to help save your town or protect your town from invaders and that sort of thing. So, you know, if you decide to go raid somebody else's town, well, they might call upon their whiter, this big angry spirit, to come protect them, or, you know, you might be able to use yours. I love this concept of the spiritual nature of of the land. It's not just the myth side of it, but the land itself is infused with all sorts of spirits. Like I said earlier, like diseases, they come from disease spirits, right? The chaos has their chaos spirits, and there's all these spirits everywhere. They're not I used to be a person spirit. They're animism, and this rock has a rock spirit, and this river has a river spirit, and so you get this lovely combination of both the mythic side and the spiritual side, that really blend into a very magical, mystical setting. One of mine, if I had to make a list of 6, I don't know that I could come up with 6 off the top of my head, but one of mine is the map. Like, look at the maps of the modern RuneQuest. The RQG maps are gorgeous, and you just get lost in thinking, what could be here? And the names that Greg and the writers have come up with over the years of places just are so evocative that make you think. Like, once you know that if it says something like it's Dragon Pass, that they mean dragons, right? The whatever you call, I don't remember what the name of it, the Cow Hills could actually be on a cow. Then you start seeing all these names of places, and you're like, what is the myth that is associated with that? And there might be a write-up for it. You Google it, right? And you might find that there is an entry in some book from the 80s or 90s where Greg said, oh yeah, that's where this thing happened. And you have this one line about some place, and it's just, you can get lost in this map. You can pick one region. Like, Sartar is the most well-defined area of Dragon Pass. Dragon Pass is the most well-defined area of all of the realm. But like, you can get lost in the corners of the hills of Sartar and just imagine wandering these lands and going on cattle raids to the next tribe over and all of this stuff. It's just it's a realm that you can see yourself getting lost in, and just no wonder that it's lived on for 50 years, right? That this has been for so long a place that people want to visit on a regular basis and go for an adventure.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of our very own Lorebeards, Andy Law, is a exceptional cartographer, and is for hire if you're interested in getting some great maps made. But I would like to go back briefly to the Morocanth, because it's an example of something that I think you were just touching on, is how deep Glorantha is. And the Morocanth, on the surface, it's like, okay, that's weird and creepy and terrifying, as Sarmillion Bloodweaver pointed out. But I think it goes deeper than that. I think that is actually a really interesting moral ambiguity about intelligence and about personhood that is being expressed in this frankly bizarre part of the map in Glorantha. And I think that's something that is I would say a big part of RuneQuest is everything you see, as you were just saying, is deep. There's layers.
Yeah. I mean, this is a game that has charts of what cults like what cults, and what cults are enemies with what cults. And, there's just so much to it. It is, frankly, it's overwhelming at first, right? So don't feel like you have to know it all. Your Glorantha is going to vary. Buy just the starter box. I have an adventure in it. It's really cool. Buy just the starter box. There's a solo adventure in it that you can run, and it gives you plenty of pre-made characters, and then several adventures that you can run a group through. And
I think you read that one for me, actually. Yeah,
the one at Chupa that you played in was the one that I wrote for the starter set, and it'll give you a good overview of the feeling of what you can do with the setting. And then if you like it, then go buy RQG, the whole book. And some of the setting books and some of, there's multiple adventure books out there that you can, like I said, sprinkle them everywhere, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to run it in a sandbox. You don't have to be a masochist like me. Just go buy an adventure and run one, right?
Sandbox adventures are a masochist. I like it.
just because I decided to take the map and go, okay, well, this is here, and this is here, and this is here, and this is here, and this is where the players are. And then when they go here, I'm going to find this. And then they're going to, okay, that's the stuff I love to do, but you don't have to do that. Just go buy Pegasus Plateau and run an adventure. Go buy, like I said, the starter set has a solo adventure and I think 3, maybe 4 adventures in it. And, they're releasing adventures, now more adventures for it that are just a PDF that you can buy on drive-thru and through Chaosium's website. It's just, there's so much to do, and it is such a wonderful setting.
I mean, it strikes me that you could also, if you wanted to, make a jump start, if you would, for Hearth and Harrowing. That would be for free RPG Day or something like that, if you felt like it. But
I've considered it. The thing holding me back is the differentiator for me is the Hearth phase and the hex crawl system, and the how much you have to put into a quick start to also give that system. It ballooned it to like before the adventure 50 something pages, and I'm sure I could keep hacking at it with an axe and get to a quick start level. Or maybe I just don't have the Hearth phase in the quick start and just have an adventure. But that's I have considered it, to be sure.
Very infamously, the free RPG adventure for Wrath of Glory, which is the system I designed, was huge. It was enormous. And it was way bigger than needed to be.
Space Marines against the Nurgle adventure?
Yeah.
I've played that.
Yeah, and it's a good. I mean, I don't get me wrong. It's fun.
It.
It's a good adventure. I dig it too, but it is way too big for a free RPG Day. And I was like, oh my! I almost had a heart attack when I saw how big the thing was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that. I get the idea of like I don't want to make a small novel for a jumpstart.
I love Wes's comment that he left in the last one. I don't plan sandboxes; they just happen somehow.
I mean, that is a common thing. Players rarely want to stay on the rails, but we should do a whole episode actually on how game masters can guide a party, because frankly, the short version of it is that nothing's ever wasted. If you had something planned and they completely go the opposite direction of that thing, that's fine. You can always use that thing later in the other direction that they went.
Yeah, I have a whole YouTube. It was one of my earlier videos, so it's not great, but I have a whole YouTube video on sandboxes versus on rails and how it's a spectrum and it's not just a singular choice between one or the other. And I could talk a whole episode on adventure design, campaign construction, and so forth.
Well, I mean, we'd love to have you back on Lorebeards and Roleplaying. So if you ever want to come and talk to us about any of those topics, I'm sure
I would spend the time.
I really wish Vera had been here, because this is definitely Vera's jam, and she would have really enjoyed, I think, bouncing off of you and your ideas, and probably sharing some of her own stories about Runequest or RuneQuest adjacent materials.
I hope she's feeling better, and maybe next time I'll get to meet her. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think. Yeah, what are anything else you'd like to say about RuneQuest, and then we'll do some final thoughts on the Hearth and the Harrow as well.
I mean, I think I covered it in it's a place where you can get lost. It's a place that is so deep and so interesting, and there's so much information. But at the same time, like, you don't need to know it all to play a fantastic adventure in this Bronze Age mythical place, right? And just like I would never tell somebody to write a core book as their first thing that they publish, don't start in the deep end in Glorantha if you don't need to. Start where it's accessible, and it can be very accessible if you just pick up the starter set and see if it's something that you and your game group gel with.
Yeah, it's also a great example of Tolkien-esque world building in a very non-standard Western fantasy setting. being Bronze Age, being mythic and not at all based in physics, like a flat world. I read that you can literally sail off the edge of the world.
Yep.
In Runequest.
It's a flat world on the back of a couple giant turtles.
But they don't treat that as like a horrible nightmare. They treat that as a navigational hazard. They're like, oh yeah, that's the end.
Don't go there. Why would you do that? Everybody knows it's the end of the world. Don't listen to that Columbus guy. He's full of it.
Why hasn't someone built a luxury resort out there for people who want to look over the edge?
Maybe that's the next adventure. We'll call it the city on the edge of. Oh wait, no, that's a bad name.
Yeah, that would be a bad name for various reasons. Oh my god, that's wild. And I think also if you take away anything from this discussion about RuneQuest is probably the top two things is it was the basis for a whole bunch of other games, including video games. Absolutely. And two, Greg Stafford is an absolute titan of role-playing game design. You should probably check out his entry in Wikipedia, if nothing else, just to kind of get yourself a little more educated about who the creators are that spawned so much of what we know today as fantasy gaming. Yeah. Those are my two biggest takeaways. And then, let's jump back into Of Hearth and the Harrowing, because I desperately want to copy this now, by the way.
I know where you can get one.
I'm going to go buy one.
So it's available right now on drive-thru in PDF. You can get a print-on-demand version through Amazon. Both are linked from my website, incharactergames.com. And if you wait not that I'm telling you to wait, I'm waiting on the print preview from drive-thru to arrive. And then I'll have a print and PDF bundle available on drive-thru. Now, I will say that the Amazon print book, the colors are better than the drive-thru print on demand. Both are high quality books that I would recommend, but if you want the colors that pop the most, the darker darks, then the Amazon one is a little bit better than the drive-thru one. I can't wait for the drive-thru bundle to be available. I know people are going to want it, and I'm just literally waiting on them to ship me the print preview so that I can say yes, it's correct, now sell it.
Well, you've made a sale today for me.
I appreciate it. Now, and yeah, I mean, In Character is going to continue. Obviously, everything is based on how well we do with this first book, but assuming it, at least pays for itself, which it looks like it's going to, then we're going to be making expansions. And, when that is a few expansions in, then we may be talking about a new line with, Hearth in space or Hearth on a ship, Pirate Hearth, or maybe Pirate Hearth is just an expansion for Hearth and the Harrowing because it takes place in the same time. But imagine going island hopping on your ship instead of hex crawling with your wagon. So
funny note, there was this studio I worked with in Germany called Ulysses Spiel, and they had a game. They had a game called Hexen 1887, which Hexen is very cool. It's actually in some ways very similar to the vibe that you've got in terms of like they have muskets and they have swords, but it's a little more Eurocentric and a little more witch hunter-y, I guess. I would say maybe Witcher adjacent.
We have a lot of witch hunter stuff in the game. I just didn't touch on the religion aspect of it, but yeah.
And one thing that Hexen desperately needed was a way to play Hexen, but as pirates.
Yeah.
So if you could do that in Of Hearth and the Harrowing, if you could have a pirate.
Yeah, I mean, I could easily see a 128-page expansion.
Oh my God!
It's just how to apply all of this. Like I don't have to redo the combat roles. I can just be like, here's ship combat rules. Here's how you turn the hex crawl into island hopping. Here's how you turn your hearth into you run a ship as a hearth. And nothing says that you can't have a hearth and a ship at the same time.
And in my mind, the first thing it comes to like a tagline or a description would be, what if One Piece but Darkest Dungeon?
Yeah, 100%.
Because that would be absolutely amazing.
This is in the core book, so it's only spoiler for players. I talked about the mountain passes were closed and the seas were blockaded, so the corruption stayed within the single country of origin that of Hearth and Harrowing focuses on. That failed. 100% that failed. Like,
we have lost containment. We've lost containment.
100% lost containment. So that means that, like, if I finish Oration and people want more, I can go across the mountains to the next land over, or I can go out to the seas with the pirate book, and we get Hearth and Harrowing on the high seas.
Wesley says, "Yep, same. I think I can sell my player group on this. You're going to put it on Foundry and or Roll20 later?"
So all of those are completely new skill sets or paying somebody to do it. So it all depends on sales, right? If I can sell enough copies that there's enough people who want it on Foundry or on Roll20, then I can pay somebody to do those conversions, then I absolutely will. I want to make it as accessible as I can to everybody, but at the end of the day, it's all a matter of dollars, right? Or my time.
And Wes,
Dark Piece, dungeon. I love it.
Yeah, Dark Piece is a great description. Oh my God! So this has been a great episode. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ross. I really appreciate it.
So we do Lorebeards and Role-Playing every Monday. And if you have enjoyed this deep dive into Runequest, please do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button so that we can spread our Lorebeardiness to the algorithm and more people can experience what this is all about. Of course, normally I'm here with my co-host Vera Samila. She's not here this week, but she will be with us next week. And we have a pretty active Discord if you want to come join us and discuss various aspects of role-playing, things like that. It's the I think one of our mods can maybe put a link to it in the chat over there if you want to see our Discord. And you can also learn about
join the Discord.
You can also learn about what's coming out soon for the other Lorebeards channels as well, because I host Lorebeards 40K on Wednesdays and Saturdays. If they want to know more about you, obviously they go to incharactergames.com. Is there any other places where you have done things on the internet that they should find?
I mean, if you search my name, and it's pretty distinct on Drive-Thru-RPG, you'll see all of the titles I've worked on over the years. I've worked on some stuff for Dune, for Conan, Starbreaker. Obviously, Order of the Stone was my Call of Cthulhu book that released last year that I was the primary author for. All the different Runequest titles that I've had a hand in. That's, I'm on all the socials, Facebook and Blue Sky and Instagram, either as In Character Games or as myself, Jared Twing.
I should mention to you brought up Starbreaker. My friend Brandon is the guy that did that, and he is the guy who would love to put the whole rule book into his settings. So I should make sure he knows about BRP and how.
Oh, he does. He and I have talked.
Okay.
Yeah. He was like, I love the fact that the whole book is able to be in there. Yeah.
And of course, you probably told him the same thing I did. It's a bad idea. Don't do it.
Well, I mean, core books are hard, right? If somebody came to me today, and we've only got 5 minutes, so I'll make it quick. But if somebody came to me today and said, I want to start publishing for RPGs, what do? I would say, write an adventure, a 32-page adventure. And, your art costs are going to be way less, right? The amount of time it's going to take you to turn it around, way less. And you're going to learn everything there is to learn about getting a product onto Drive-Thru, whether that's through DM Guild or like RuneQuest's Johnstown Compendium. They have one for Call of Cthulhu. There's all these different systems where you can write for somebody else's game and do it legally and that sort of thing. Like, there is no reason to go write a core rule book. Like, I only did this because I've been writing for 8 years in the industry, and I finally felt like I had learned enough about how to do this that, I could make this happen. And I still, if I were to go back today and talk to me a year and a half ago, I would say, don't write a core book. What are you doing? Like, that's dumb. That's ludicrous. Like, you'll never, the fact that it is a ton of work, and you don't need to do that to start writing. Write a little adventure, write a setting, write a lore book or something for somebody else's setting, so that you get that stuff underneath your belt. And then after you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 titles out, then you'll have learned how to do this. And even me, with the experience I had writing for other people, there was so much I had to learn about getting a book out the door, layout, and the business side of things, and everything else. So, that would be my how to start. Don't do what I did.
Yeah, same. I was actually just a writer. Like I was a good writer. I was actually a fairly decent editor, but that was like it, right? And then I went to work at Fantasy Flight Games, and they're like, "Cool, now you need to learn how to do layout. Now you need to learn how to do art direction. Now you need to learn how to do budgeting and production and getting the print proofs back and being able to do all of that." I was like, "Whoa!" Like it talk about sharpening the knife. Like it went from I have one and maybe a half a skill to I have 10 skills.
But you had the years of experience in the industry so that you had something to go off of. Even though you were just a writer, you had, all of the experience of working on so many products in front of you that like you had a basis for all of these things to build on. Well, and that's what allowed me to do what I did is, because I had worked on so many other things and seen that, from that point of view.
I was just going to back up your statement of, core books are hard, because even after all that, making core books was very, very difficult. And I still to this day, I'm like, I'd almost rather do a source book or a supplement or something. Source books are really where I like to live. I love iterating on and building off of a budding point,
Yeah, I made there was a point where, as Hearth was releasing, where I was like, so do I support Hearth or do I go write another core book? Because I'd spent the last year and a half writing a core book. I felt like this is what I do now. And obviously I've decided to support Hearth, but there may be a second line still brewing in the back of my brain going, well, there's this system that you could apply to this way to BRP and you could make this cool thing.
Hey, just all I'm saying is don't lose my number. I'd love to work with you again.
Same, Russ. Same.
All right. Well, that's it for today's Lorebeard role play. We appreciate everybody who showed up and took part in this discussion. Of course, you can see us on YouTube, and I will be adding some show notes for links to Hearth and the Harrowing and BRP's SRD as well, I think. So catch you all next week, and thank you so much for joining us. Jared,
thank you.
You've been a real pleasure, sir.
Appreciate it, Russ. Always a pleasure.
All right, everybody, take care.